order. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight. Before that, would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. With that, we have the 3 items: 1.3 audit presentation, finance update, well planning. We also have at 6 o'clock our truth and taxation meeting and our regular board meeting. So we'll begin. With us today is Tom Olinger from Avenue, Lisa Ryder, our finance director from Redmond Public Schools for that. So I want you to introduce yourself so they know which one is who. And we'll begin.
I'm Tom Olinger. I'm the governmental service partner at ABDO. I've been working with the school since probably 3-4 years now. So yeah, we'll certainly go through the presentation and kind of similar to what we had last year. But certainly as we kind of go, any questions that do come up, feel free to ask as we go.
So if Lisa, you could load up that presentation for us for the audit presentation off the board packet. I'm Lisa Ryder, Finance Director for Redmond Public Schools. And so very, very pleased that we are here to report the financial audit for 2023. Okay. Here it comes.
All right, we can certainly, as I did, we can probably go to the next slide here. Just a few of the items that we will go through. We'll just talk about the overall audit opinion, some of our findings and responsibilities that we do as auditors. We'll go through some results with mainly some budget results of the general fund and overall fund balance. We'll look at some of the other governmental funds, mainly the community service fund and the food service fund. And then we'll also kind of do a trend, key performance indicators, where we're kind of comparing with other school districts around the state too, just to kind of see where their trends are going and where your trends are, and kind of have a little discussion about that. Okay, on the next slide, the overall audit results. So for auditor opinion, we did have an unmodified opinion, which basically means a clean opinion. We're following the GAAP basis of accounting. This year there was, each year they've been kind of adding various standards. So this year, GASB 96, which they're to 100 now, but GASB 96 was mainly taking a look at basically software subscriptions and seeing if they are long-term and need to be booked as a overall liability that's out there. So we kind of took a look at that and did implement that for this year, which was kind of the major undertaking of looking at all the software subscriptions that were out there. As far as Minnesota legal compliance, what we do as Minnesota legal compliance, we take a look at basically various state statutes. We have some guidelines that we go through. We do some sample testing on those statutes and kind of make sure that you're following those. There was one finding which we'll note here shortly, and then also as part of the audit, we did have a single audit this year. So if there's federal dollars that were spent over $750,000, we need to do some special testing related to that. Basically, compliance on a particular federal program, which do rotate year over year. And then also kind of taking a look at the overall internal controls on how you're administrating that program there. So this year we did do the child nutrition as the federal program, and we did have one finding as we went through that, which we will discuss there. So kind of on that slide there, one of the legal compliance findings, we take a look at the overall student activities and where they're at, and we noticed that there was one student activity account that did have a deficit balance. As part of the state statutes, those should be kind of trued up at the end of the year and making sure that there's no deficits there. There was one instance with that. And then on the internal, or on the single audit side of things, eligibility is one thing that we take a look at. So we do a sample test of various students to make sure if they are eligible that they meet the income requirements there. We tested 20 through there, and there was one that was really shown as a total free lunch program, but it was actually qualified for the reduced program on there too, based on the income. So that was a finding related to that. Okay, the next slide there. One thing, just want to note, I think we mentioned it last year, is just, for accounting purposes and stuff like that, I think, currently the capital asset policy is at $150 or $1,500, which is probably a low threshold. So any assets that were over 1,500 need to be capitalized and depreciated over the year. We'd probably make a recommendation to change that policy to $5,000. It's really kind of an accounting burden to depreciate that little amount going forward. So it's just a real easy taking a look at the policy and making that change accordingly to that. So kind of starting off, which kind of drives a lot of the financial information here too, is just the overall average daily membership for this year. For 2023, we had 2462 for students there. As you can kind of see, that has been decreasing over the last few years, with a little over 120 decrease for this last year. And as you kind of know, that does drive a lot of the funding that's there. So we'll kind of take a look at that on how your expenditures are following, and making sure that you're kind of taking a look at that as you move forward. The overall general fund balance, what we really kind of take a look at is what is that fund balance in comparison to the expenditures for the general fund. The district currently has 5% of the general fund expenditures as their overall policy. So as you can kind of see, that is a little bit over what it was for this last year, which is at about 12.6%. But as you kind of see, we've had that increase in going up over the last few years. I think we saw this with a lot of school districts as those federal dollars, the additional ESSER and GEERS dollars coming in, that there was a little buildup of fund balance. But now as those are starting to kind of go away, we're spending down some of those dollars for 2023. So even if you were to take a look at since 2009 versus 23, we do have a little bit of an increase there, but it's kind of getting back to that fund balance back when it was 2019. One thing I will say that, the expenditures are continuing to increase over the year, which is pretty common. Salaries, we all know that becomes a challenge. So those are increasing. Keep in mind that as those increase, fund balance also has to kind of increase to stay within that percentage. So, kind of planning for that and making sure that kind of rolls forward year after year too. Turning to the next slide, which is the overall general fund budget to actual. As you can kind of see, the revenues were under budget by about $1 million, with the expenditures offsetting some of those expenditures that also came under budget by about $400,000. Overall, we had a decrease in fund balance of about $1 million. So we were certainly kind of really is driven by that revenue that's there. The majority of that, a good chunk of that, was the state dollars, which we kind of go back to. Even the reduction in students too is definitely a driver there. And then as we kind of see in some other slides too, we've also seen that special ed increase some over the last few years, which is also will be certainly collected as part of that too. On the next slide, taking a look at the general fund revenues per ADM. So this kind of gives your breakdown of your state sources, your federal sources, and then your local sources, which the majority of that is the property tax levy that is there for the local. So year over year, the state sources did increase slightly for this last year. But as you can kind of see, the federal dollars did decrease for this last year, as we kind of see some of the COVID dollars being reduced for this last year. Property taxes did increase. We'll have a per ADM. It's not really necessarily the property taxes themselves increase. I think it's more of since it is per ADM, it's more of the reduction in students is kind of driving up that variance there. So taking a look at the overall expenditures, I think if you're taking a look at the mix here, I think the main reduction from the previous year is related to the regular instruction, which does make sense with the reduction of students and the need there that has increased in there with the counts down. The rest of them have stayed relatively consistent year over year. The next slide here really kind of shows the trend of the general fund expenditures per ADM. So as you kind of see, we benchmark out, granted we don't know the amounts for next year in comparison to that, so we kind of project that out based on what previous are. We have seen that increasing, so it's probably following the same trend there. I think the variable and maybe where your district is at too, we've seen several schools that have been kind of understaffed with the teaching just because, and basically staff positions, just because people aren't available type of thing too. So I think that's certainly something to watch. That is, if this last year, if there has been understaffing and you do get that staffing, up to a level that where it's at, that could certainly bump up those costs then too per ADM as you move forward. So that is something that's been common out there. Taking the mix of the general fund expenditures by object code. So this basically kind of has, where your salaries are, benefits and purchase services and various supplies and capital. As you kind of see, the salaries did have a slight decrease there, which we saw kind of a shift with purchase services there. So there was definitely additional dollars to other districts, probably to supplement some of that personal service side there too. So that was kind of that shift there between the percentages for this last year. As we kind of take a look at the overall statewide averages of the general fund balance, as I had mentioned earlier, we've seen that kind of gradual increase over the years, and then the state average kind of dropping down over the last few years as those are spending down. So I think that has been a trend. I think we want to make sure we're keeping it above that fund balance policy moving forward and monitoring it as you go. Overall food service budget to actual. So we did. They had budgeted about $86,000 loss in the food service, which expenditures did come under budget for this last year, which is certainly good. So we only had a loss of about $4,000. So you kind of stayed right in line with where you're at there. Still kind of under that 6-month requirement of expenditures too. So nothing to be concerned with there. Taking a look at the overall food service expenditures per ADM, I think as we saw that we did come under budget with the food service, so that was a decrease. So that really kind of even offsets some of the decrease in the ADM too. So they kind of do go hand in hand. With not as many students, you're not going to have as many expenditures related to that. Taking a look at the community service fund. Revenues did exceed budget by about $281,000. We were budgeting a decrease for this last year, and you actually had an increase in the community service fund. So the programs are happening out there. I think we'll take a look at the next slide and we'll see kind of where your programs are. I think you generally have more programs within the community service than others in the district there. So that's kind of what drives that up. So at the end of the year, we did have about $751,000 in fund balance related to that. So as you kind of take a look at the community service side, like I said, you are well above average on where those expenditures are, but your revenues are coming in just because of the volume of programs that you do have. The debt service fund, over the next couple years, that debt service principal and interest is gonna stay about the same. Good thing is the 2014 A bonds will be dropping off, not next year, but the year after will be your last payment there. It's not a huge amount, so your principal and interest and your debt service levy tied to that probably stays pretty consistent through 2027, when the big bond issue drops off for 2016. Okay, taking a look at the cash and investment balances, there was a decrease this year in cash of about a little over $1 million, $1.3 million. Direct relationship to your building fund. As you know, when you bond, the bonds come in, those capitals related to that building fund get spent down. So, when that bond first comes in, that cash is going to be high. So it's just a matter, I think there's about 1.6 million in capital that was paid out of there with just of the spend down of those dollars. So, if you take that off, there'd probably be just a slight increase in cash from the previous year then too. Couple of comparisons overall with other school districts within your region and your statewide averages. So per ADM, the overall property taxes are below both those averages. We kind of also want to take a look at how does it impact that, because really you're looking at the whole Region 10, which probably doesn't have as much, some of the other school districts in there don't as much industrial and other market value there too. So we kind of want to then take a look at, okay, how is it impacting the overall citizens? Just because you can levy more and that mix. So, overall taxes per home is right in line with where other school districts are. And then also just kind of the overall property tax per 100,000 on the home there is slightly below those averages within the state and also the region that you're currently in. Okay, taking a look at just ADM administrative expenditures. So we did have an uptick in administrative costs for this last year. I went back and looked. It's not necessarily an increase in expenditures. I think this is definitely more of a result in the reduction of students for the admin side of that. Elementary and secondary instruction, it did have a decrease, or it did trend down. I think as we talked about earlier, we have seen a little bit of a trend down just because of the staffing levels of school districts. So I think be aware of that could certainly uptick if that staffing comes into play going forward. We did see that increase in special ed per ADM too. So as those costs kind of went up and the student count went down, that was a result of that. Because we look at the whole, not just the special ed students, when we look at the ADM, that's the ADM of the school as a whole. Okay, last slide here, we just have the overall instructional support services, which flattened out. We did have an increase last year and it's kind of flattened out over the last year. So those kind of expenditures kind of went in line with where the ADM went down to. So, taking just kind of wrap things up, I think overall the audit went well. We did note a couple of findings there, but Lisa certainly provided us the information in a timely manner, which is always very helpful in the overall process, and we do appreciate that because we do ask for a lot and ask to upload a lot. But overall, it went well, so we certainly appreciate that. So, with that, I would certainly open it up to any questions that the board may have.
Any questions? Or Lisa, do you have anything you want to add before we go to questions?
I would report just a little more detailed about the reasons why on the loss in our next report.
Very good. Any questions? Oh, you drove all the way over Jordan or Mankato, were you in the office today?
No, I was at home today, so, no, that was fine. So, no, it's a nice drive down.
Yeah. We could be playing golf.
Yeah, I know.
By July, or by Thursday, it sounds like it's supposed to be
Yeah.
very nice. So, if there are any questions, otherwise we'll move along. Thank you very much.
Well, certainly, I thank you, and if there's anything that ever comes up, feel free to reach out to us, so. Appreciate
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great night.
You too.
Yeah, thanks.
You can stick around for the finance report if you want to. It's up to you.
We've talked about it already, so.
All right, finance, update.
So Lisa, if you could pull up for us, the one that is page 36, the budget to actual document that is in the board packet, please. All right, so tonight we want to dig a little bit further into the information you just heard from our audit firm with regard to the outcome of our fiscal year 23 audited financial statements. Tom?
Thank you.
Mhm.
I would have caught that.
And so, as part of this, what we want to take a look at is there's a particular page in your financial report that really kind of lays it out for you well, and that is page 36. And in your board packet, it's, I believe the one that's referred to as budget versus actual. So as this is brought up on the screen, which I think you can now see, I just want to point out, it was mentioned that we have an overall loss in our general fund of $1 million. So the reason, or what we really want to answer is, why is that? And what this really shows, this particular page, shows you what was the original budget when you started the year, and it would have been the previous June that you approved it. And then mid-year, you revised it, and that's the final budget as it's listed on that page. And then the actual amounts is the audited figures. So at the time when it was revised, at that juncture, we were anticipating that our revenues were going to be less than expenditures to the tune of $444,000, and I'm rounding, okay? So the end result, though, was $1,025,000, okay? So why is the difference? And so as I really want to point to the first part, which is the revenues, and take a look at that, because it's really evident up there as to exactly where those dollars are. Now, one thing that isn't necessarily kind of broken down enough from my perspective is the state resources. I want to dig a little more into that, but I do want to show you that overall, we had expenditures that were actually $412,000 on the expense side, better than what we were planning for budget, okay? So we underspent on the expenditures. That helped us. However, when you compare it to the revenues, which is where we lost more, with $1 million down, that is where that difference of what wasn't necessarily planned for at the time of the revised budget compared to what we actually ended up with. That make sense? So the next document, Lisa, if you could pull up the second document, this one is just a little bit, same information, okay? Same totals that you're gonna see on that page 36. But on this one, I did break down a little further the state aid. And in doing so, the point is to really point out kind of that over-under piece with regard to our budget compared to actuals. So this document is the post-audit review of budget to actual revenues and expenses. And as we, if we focus on the revenue section here, that 483 of actual revenue was down from what we had budgeted at revised by that amount, okay? Now you can see line by line how much of it was levy. It wasn't levy. Levy came in actually a little bit higher than what we had planned and budgeted, okay? On the general state aid, that's down by $430,000 compared to what had been planned for in the revised budget. Some of this is about estimates as well, okay? So at the time we're doing the audit work, we are in the month of September, and we are looking and working on from the numbers that we have then. The state, in the meantime, is still going through all these processes with every single school district in the state with regard to students. And as we each report our students, if there's conflicts, those have to be worked out. By the time you get to the end of November, those are kind of finalized and worked out. However, our audited statements need to be kind of completed and calculated so they can test it. And that's usually in September, October, okay? So the numbers used there may have been possibly a little bit understated compared to what we might end up with as things cleared up with the error messages for the students, right? But in all, when you overestimate in one year, it's going to come through in the next year. When you underestimate in one year, it's going to come through in the next year. So if we are underestimating a bit in the fiscal year 23, we're going to see it come back to us in 24. Okay, it's not like it's lost money or anything. So just know that about estimates. And honestly, estimates are kind of the world we live in when it comes to finances for school districts, because you have to give so much information upfront to be tested and audited, and it's before you actually finalize everything, because November 30th was the deadline. All right, so with that said, the same is true in special education. And special education is even trickier because there's so much work that's still being done to tie out our revenues and expenditures, mostly expenditures on special ed, to exactly what it was that was recorded in another system they call CEDRA, okay? So that reconciliation is happening again across the state, and so much of our expenditures are reliant upon GCED with regard to they do the reporting for us. And now it's a matter of making sure our UFORS matches that. I was doing a last minute entry up until a week and a half ago, just to make sure that those things were tying out. So given that information, these estimates, again, are estimates, but based on that, we did come through with the actual calculation for special ed revenue coming in less than what had been budgeted and planned for. So I wouldn't say that our challenge here has been the expenditures so much as it has been in the planning and the budgeting for what that revenue is going to look like compared to what we ended up with, okay? Some of it on the gen ed is going to be a little bit about the loss of students because it's kind of cumulative on some of these things. It's not just gen ed revenue, then you also get less in this other revenue and this other revenue. And so cumulatively that can kind of increase more. On the special ed, I believe that's largely due to our estimates. The estimate used at the time of the budget, the estimate used at the end of the year, okay? So I hope that helps to explain that a little bit more. I do want to talk about federal. Federal looks like we underestimated, our actual revenue came in less 308,000 compared to what we had budgeted. The thing about federal is you get your federal revenue will equal whatever you spent. So if you didn't spend as aggressively as you had planned in the budget on federal funds, you won't receive that money. So the nice thing about that is if you're down on federal revenue, you're also down on federal expenditures. Does that make sense? So part of the reason why we're down on expenditures by 412,000 is a result of us not spending 308,000 of those federal funds, okay? So when you look at it from our perspective of why is the net ending balance down $1 million, the federal kind of comes out of the picture because you're down on revenue, but you're also down on expense, right? And so we are back to focusing in on that gen ed revenue and the special ed revenue compared to our expenditures. Now, special ed revenue is always a year off, okay? So keep that in mind. Our revenue in 23 fiscal year was based off from our expenditures from the prior year, okay? But tuition-based expenditures come into play for the students that you're currently serving as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and it does get to be very difficult to estimate that number and nail it. Yes.
So when you say tuition-based, are you talking about tuition out students?
Many of our costs can be that we may have students that are residents, but we're not serving them directly. They may be served instead by GCED or other districts. And when that's the case, we need to pay what we call a tuition bill to them. And we still receive the revenue though, because they're our residents. So we're paying this expense and our revenue is coming in. Not always is that revenue equal to the expense.
Yes.
Do you have any clue why our transportation was so far over budget?
Yeah.
Declining students, that struck me as a lot that went over.
Right. I think that one could use a little bit more look at that, but it is the cost overall. Now, keep in mind that also is our field trip costs, right? Those are included in those numbers as well when we talk about transportation. So some of those costs may be related to more activities than what we had seen in the previous year as well. But what we need to do is get the budget back kind of up to speed with that. Does that make sense? So let's say you had more activities that were going out to various different events, and that needed transportation more so in 23 than what we had actually incurred in 22. You're going to see that increase there. Now, as we compare it to budget, though, one would hope that we would have updated that budget, but not always do we know like how to necessarily anticipate that without it necessarily being set. Does that make sense? So if you incur the cost additionally, I know that our routes themselves were around 33 routes, right? So we didn't increase necessarily our routes of transportation. We did see an increase in our premium, or I should say our per route cost in 23 compared to 22, but all of which should have been able to be budgeted. So I really believe that that difference, as we dig further into that, we're going to find that that difference is more around the additional costs related to field trips and things of that nature, or activity buses, right? Yes.
Did we, the pandemic and not having field trips and now we have field trips, is that anything to do with the over cost or?
I think that's a part of it, but I mean, that's largely where you're gonna see one of these slides here where our costs per ADM for just general fund balances, we're kind of doing this like bell curve, right? And so what I'm not seeing on all the slides is what is that 2019 year, which was that full year before the pandemic.
Right.
So that's another thing we can kind of benchmark against to see what that looks like. My concern is that as we have looked at the last fiscal year 20 through 23, we've had federal funds in the mix. And as we move forward, we're going to still in 24 have federal funds in the mix. But when we plan for 25, we won't have maybe a little, but not much of federal funds remaining in that next year. And so that's where we have to do something with regard to our expenditures that have grown and increased. It is true, we haven't been able to fill positions in 23 like we had planned to. And so a lot of the reason why we were under budget, I think, is a result of that. So moving forward, you know, what are we going to be able to rely upon there? You know, are we going to somehow address our expenditures in whole and bring them back down a little bit to match up with the true enrollment that we're seeing? Are we going to be finding ourselves utilizing those federal funds in the next year, for example, for things that we know aren't going to exist in the future, or if they are, we have a game plan for them, right, as to how we're going to fund it. So that's the work we have before us in coming into the fiscal year 25 planning of that budget. I think it's important that we take a real close look at our 23 expenditures and what it is that how we spent that money and what funded it, and then what is the intent as we move forward. Are you planning to use those same expenditures in the future? And if so, how are we going to fund it now if it were funded by federal funds in the past?
What's the difference between athletics activities and student activity?
Mm-hmm. So our athletic activities, that is largely around our, exactly what it says, athletics and activities, and those costs, primarily your stipends, your supplies, the equipment that's needed and such for those activities. Whereas your student activity is going to be those clubs that are student-led. And it was only a couple years ago that all came under board control and now gets reported as part of the general fund, but we still track it separately. And so as you look at that, you would expect that to be very close to, you know, not too much of a variance there. Although I will say sometimes it's difficult to budget that. You know, sometimes there might be possibly there's a trip overseas in one year, whereas in another year it's not, you know, and so you just have to kind of watch for those things and be really aware of what might be upcoming. But that is the difference between the student activity and the athletics activities.
Yes.
I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but new person. So when you were talking about the federal funds that are going away, are you talking about that ESSER funds from the pandemic?
What we have remaining are our ESSER funds, yep. Most of the other federal funds that I'm referring to that are going away are going to be the, you know, we had some pandemic relief funds that were directly tied to just loss of revenue, some of it which was just over the period of time, there were like 3 phases. We're in that last phase of funds that are now available and continue to be only through September of 2024, which will fall into the fiscal year 25, but very little. So it's those funds that we're going to now be focusing on in, first of all, making sure we spend them, right? And then secondly, making sure that we have a plan for how we're going to do this without those.
Yes, let's go.
So when I look at these numbers and I think ahead a little bit to the next budget cycle, I know there's a lot of unfunded mandates that have come down from the legislature, and I think that's going to be a future workshop topic. But we're going to really need to, as I'm looking at these numbers, really, and if that federal revenue is going away, and we'll have more expenditures that we're going to have to find out how to fund in our budget, I feel like we're going to be in a crunch situation at some point in the near future, if not already.
Yeah, I think that there is a need for us to really review exactly how much we can afford as we build our 25 budget.
I think this is a nice tool to use as we form that 25 budget.
Mhm.
I like this. Anybody else have any other questions?
Lisa, I really appreciate you and all the work,
Yes,
and
thank you so
this,
much.
This nice form that's up here, it's really helpful to understand, because
Okay.
I'm sure you, I'm not the only one whose eyes go a little bug-eyed when I look at all these numbers, and I get a little palpitation in my heart, so thank you for all the work that you do.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mhm.
Okay, you might as well just stay right there. You're in the hot seat tonight.
Yeah.
Is, excuse me, Logan and Lynn, are you on the call too?
Hi there, Jim. Logan's here.
Logan, is Lynn joining us or just you? You solo?
Most likely just me if he hasn't joined yet. He's currently en route to Monon, Indiana for an employer visit. So if he was able to join while traveling, he was going to. If not, unfortunately, you're stuck with me.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Some of us know you, not everybody does. What you do.
Yeah. Happy to do so. Thanks, Jim. So my name is Logan Tufte. I'm a relationship manager at IntelliSense Inc. in Albert Lea, Minnesota. We're the benefits consultant and advisor to the district. So your employee benefits plan, think your health insurance, medical, dental, and for today's discussion, the Well at Work Clinic, we help with advising and communication on those benefits for employees and on structuring those as well. So I really serve as more of the day-to-day contact. When things come up, I'm generally the first person at our organization that individuals reach out to. And then I assist with presentations, employee education. At this point, I am sure Lisa and employees are tired of seeing my face and hearing my name at this standpoint. And then Lynn, I like to refer to him as the brains of the organization. He's the senior consultant. Again, he couldn't be here today, but he's been working with the district for over 10 years and helps with a lot of the high level planning and execution of your benefits package.
Very good. So who wants to start? Go ahead, Lisa.
So I wondered, Lisa, if you could bring up for us the Well at Work extra we just added to the board packet this afternoon. So it is not in your written board packet, but we did provide some summary information with regard to the Well at Work, and it is included now in the board packet under extras. And so I think, Logan, is there stuff you want to start to talk about? This is a summary of what we had kind of pulled together. I can maybe fill in after you're done then.
Yeah, would be happy to do so. So we had the request to go back and just provide some high-level information on the Well at Work Clinic, both where things are trending from a financial standpoint, but we also were informed about talking about, the hours of operation of the clinic, for example, and then also number of patients served that was asked. So just high level as far as the information relevant to 2022 or 2023 is what we've got displayed here on the screen. So looking at calendar year 2022, so January to December of 2022, when we look at the cost to administer the Well at Work Clinic. Now, an important thing to note here and remember is that the Well at Work Clinic is actually shared between yourselves and the city of Red Wing. So when we're talking about the costs today, that is the total cost of the clinic that is split between yourself and the city on a proportional basis based on usage. So every month, the math is done to look at what percentage of the visits at the clinic are held by district employees and what percentage are held by city employees. And then the clinic's costs for those are then split based on those percentages. When we're presenting today, it's for the total clinic cost. So that's the important thing to note. The calendar year cost last year for the clinic was $464,325. When you look at what that comes out to on a monthly average, that's $38,693. When looking at what drives those costs, the important thing to remember, there's two different things. One is considered fixed cost, and the other is variable cost. Fixed costs are the largest portion of that. That includes the provider fee. So basically, what are you paying for the two providers that actually provide the services within the clinic? That includes rent, utilities, custodial supplies, the phone charges. Basically, what are the fixed monthly costs that are needed just to have an operational clinic? The smaller portion of those costs are called variable costs. Now, those are the actual costs that the Well at Work clinic will bill the city and the district based on the type of care they need to provide. So that's the cost to do lab work, for example. The cost for each visit that comes in, the cost for a strep test, for example. That's what would be the variable costs that are associated with that. So those two things go together to create that monthly average. Again, the majority of that cost is the fixed cost. If I were to look at the 2022 numbers and pull up the specific fixed cost, I'd have to get it up here. It's going to be somewhere between, I believe, $33,000 to $35,000 a month is going to be the fixed cost there. When we're looking at 2023 so far, so the data we had available was through June so far of this year. Currently, we're trending at $233,790. That monthly average is $38,965. So the current monthly average cost to administer the clinic for 2023 versus 2022 is actually very similar, which is good. We've actually seen, if we go back historically, some larger increases there year over year. Again, when you look at the fiscal year for 2023, so this would be, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's taking June back 12 months, correct?
Correct.
Yep. So the fiscal year, when you look at basically July 1st of last year up to June 30th of this year, it's $412,313 or $34,359 for your monthly average. Now, we'll get more solid data as we continue through the year and we get those finalized billings to see where we come out for 2023. Now, for perspective, when we're looking at those numbers, if I was to look back and just look at 2020 for what the cost to operate the clinic was in 2020, it was about $360,000. So we have seen a significant increase in the last few years for the cost to administer the clinic. Again, the majority of that is coming from the fixed costs to do the clinic, and I can walk through that in greater detail. One other piece of information we wanted included on here was talk about the hours of operation. We were asked, okay, how often is the clinic actually open? So the clinic runs Monday through Friday. During the school year, Mondays and Fridays, it's open from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. are the actual listed hours of the clinic. Tuesdays and Thursdays, it runs from 9:30 to 5:30. And Wednesdays, it runs from 10:30 to 6:30. So you can tell there's a little bit of a spread of the times there. The idea is to have it open on varying times to try to meet individual schedules. If there's a particular individual that in the morning is going to work better for them, we've got those Mondays and Fridays where it's open earlier. And then we actually had to get this adjusted this year, but the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday slots, we actually were able to get those extended to be open a little bit later because we had heard some information back from teachers that there wasn't enough time after school in order for individuals to access the clinic. So we're, again, trying to meet employees where they're at by having variability there. When you look at the most utilized time slots, some of the slots between 6 and 9 tend to be the most popular, but lately, especially since September onward, since the new school year started, we've also seen an uptick of those slots after 4 p.m. on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So it's good to know that those new slots are being utilized, but it tends to be earlier in the morning or later in the evening, which would make sense because that's outside of individuals' working hours. Last piece of data on the screen here that I'm going through is just the number of patients served. So in 2022, it's important to note when we say patients served, the way that Well at Work reports that is number of visits. So this is the number of visits that I've encountered. If I am an employee at Red Wing and I go in for 3 visits during the year, each one of them's counting towards that total. It's not just saying, well, this is one patient, for example. So there's 1,377 total visits across the clinic last year. This year so far, through 10 months worth of visits data, we're at about 981. So we're trending a little behind where we were last year from that visit count. I will say the 2 months not included on here, November and December, are the most heavily utilized months out of the year. In historical years, the clinic averages between 80 to 90%, if not higher, utilization during November and December. So we are going to see a heavier increase these next 2 months. But if we got up to the same total as last year, I would be surprised just based on current usage.
Okay, thanks, Logan.
Yeah.
Superintendent Wagner, do you have something? See, your name is on there, you put it as a presenter.
I was collaborating with both Lisa and Logan on this. The nice thing that Logan and Lynn provide is the usage reports quarterly and monthly, and so I'm able to meet with him as well as a representative from the All at Work Clinic as well. So we're able to kind of keep on top of the needs, whether it's medications, appointments. For example, the extension of the hours of operation is.
Ms. Ryder?
So this is something that on a regular basis, monthly basis, as we receive the invoice from Health Partners for the clinic operations, then we are then taking a look at that along with the utilization for the month and billing then the city of Red Wing for their portion based on the utilization that is the city versus the school district. In the end as well, there are additional costs that are incurred for the clinic in whole. Some of which is the rent itself, some of it is the custodial and the costs there for supplies and things of that nature. So those are part of the calendar year expenditures that you see there. And as we true that up then at the end of the year, that can result in actuals being a little bit less if we haven't utilized all of those budgeted dollars. And so that will mean a little bit of a fluctuation as to what actually then is ending up being billed at the end as we true things up with the city. But otherwise, it's pretty much the bills and expenses we get related to the clinic, we record, and then we have the portion that we're billing out to the city, and the difference then is our cost. And as you see here, we keep track of this in a separate fund all of its own. So it's all something that is at the end of the year, we make sure that it's all zeroed out. And so those costs then are showing as part of our health insurance costs in the general fund. If you are wondering, like, where does that land for our portion? It lands in the health insurance costs that you see on the general fund.
Yes.
So I guess one of the reasons we wanted to bring this forward today, and I really appreciate seeing this. I don't know that I've seen these numbers in a while, so thank you for that. I think what we want to know, at least what I want to know is it cost effective for the money that we're spending? So if I'm just looking, and I know that this isn't divided out between the school district and the city, but if you look at the calendar year 2022, and that's expense $464,000, and you divide that by the number of patients served, 1,377. If you divide that out, each visit is costing $337.20. If I'm doing my math correctly.
Yep, I come to the same math.
So, but we spend $200 a day for a substitute. So if a teacher is taking an hour off or a day off to go to the clinic or whatever, we're spending $137.20 above what a substitute would be. Is that correct?
That if you're comparing the cost that it is at the clinic versus the cost it would be if we just had a sub, yes, that would be a fair statement.
Yes.
Well, I think another question to ask is, what, for the employees, what is the cost for same day clinic visit versus paying for this? And I don't think it's $300 some per visit, and that goes towards your deductible as an employee. or a member that's over on the insurance?
This is just what the district is paying.
Right.
Not what an individual is paying for their deductible. I think that this is a network for them.
Right,
So it probably is, just goes to their copay or their deductible, but
right, but I guess what I'm saying is,
Sorry, I just want to step in and make a quick correction there. The actual cost at the clinic is free to the employee. So if an employee goes in for care at the clinic, there is no cost accumulation to their deductible or their max amount of pocket. The total cost of the visit is billed to the district and or to the city. So it's basically a free visit to that individual.
okay,
So if the clinic weren't there,
right,
the individual would need to take a day, have a sub,
right,
and incur that cost individually.
right, okay.
Right, for somebody that used it when I was on the school insurance, there's no cost to the person going to the clinic, but there is a cost for the visit to the clinic.
And that
as
we
well.
pay.
And so the LMC committee is looking at opening up for RFPs or bids, the clinic. And some of it is also what if we decide, what kind of services do we want above and beyond what's there? Do we want Saturday service? Do we want to put that in the RFP? Do we want to put different hours? Different type of prescriptions that we're told some provider in there doesn't want to give out some type of things for birth control.
Correct.
So those are the things we want to talk about. Another thing, Logan and Lisa, if you know, maybe, is there a number of, I'm gonna use prescriptions or different types of antibiotics, is there a limit to the number that a well-at-work clinic can have on site? Is there a magic number of 30, 100, or what?
I don't have that exact number. I would have to go back to the Well at Work clinic and ask if there is any limitation to the numbers that they can have. I know that there is the list of medications that they have in stock, but they don't say, for example, let's say they have amoxicillin in stock. It doesn't say, well, we've got 10 doses of it available. I'd have to follow up and ask that for you, Jim.
I'm just asking if I was under the impression there's a limit, but we can check that
Well,
out.
I'm sure there will be a capacity limit, how much they can actually hold, especially depending upon if any of it has like temperature requirements. So I'm confident there is. I just don't know what it is off the top of my head.
That's fine. Okay. You miss?
Yeah, well, when I look at it, I see that if you average the patients, right, there's about 100 patients a month, which if there's 20 days of clinic in a month, that's 5 patients a day. So that's not all district patients. So is this clinic really necessary to see 5 patients a day? That would be another question I would have.
Good question.
Yep, it is an excellent question. And another thing to look at in that discussions and going back into the historical data, as well as also looking at why that's at the averages it is now. For example, if you go back to 2020, why it isn't a massive difference. At that time, there was 1,539 visits across 2020 for that year. And so we've seen a decrease of almost, 2020 to 2022, for example, a decrease of 200 visits a year, for example. And so it's talking about some of the things that are impacting that. Some of that is changes to plan designs, for example. The city did, and this why it has minimal impact, the city did introduce a series of plans that are not free to use the clinic. So if an individual moves onto one of those plans, is that going to decrease some of the usage? We've also had the Well at Work clinic actually recently. We asked them we reviewed the data year over year, comparing 2023 so far to 2022. And the majority of the decrease we've seen is individuals not utilizing the clinic for preventative visits. So we've asked the Well at Work clinic to dig into some of the deeper data there about what type of preventative care is not being seen. Is it vaccinations that people have chosen to no longer receive at the clinic or some other type of care that they're not utilizing? That's definitely having an impact on that per cost visit number. Another thing I'll also mention, and it's hard to calculate based in the medical plan, and it has to deal with the fact that the Well at Work clinic is administered by a different company than your insurance plan. So Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota provides the actual medical insurance to your employees. And one of the issues we talked about the comparison of, okay, so if the average cost at the clinic is $330, what would be the cost should somebody go and receive that same care at another facility? Is that Health Partners is willing to take the clinic and calculate average cost. We're just doing it right now. But Blue Cross Blue Shield, it's much tougher for them to review the same type of care that can be administered, right? Looking at it and say, how much does a regular office visit cost? How much is a strep test? How much is a lab, for example? And for them to be willing to share that data with Health Partners to actually run a comparison. So we have asked for that. We're working to try to provide that to actually say for your own claims data. So to say for a Red Wing employee, for example, the average office visit cost X. At the Well at Work clinic, the average office visit cost is Y, so that you actually can have that comparison. It's just hard to get those two differing insurance companies to work together to provide that data. But it is something that we're looking into. There's just some difficulty there. Historically, prior to 2021, when Health Partners both administered the Well at Work clinic and was the medical insurance provider to the district, we could get that data in a much more expedited fashion. But again, now we have two companies that are theoretically competing insurance companies that we're trying to get to work together to provide that comparison data for you. That is something as well, though, in the RFP that Jim's talking about. That's the type of math that will be done when we have other providers come in and provide bids. We're going to want to look at what their expected average cost per visit is compared against what we think that somebody could receive in the general community, and try to determine the value there.
But I think we're gonna wrap this up, Logan, because we will do taxation, but I think the point brought up by a couple board members is this is cost effective for the district, for the dollars that we're paying. And I think that was really what was brought up by Ms. Rowe and Ms. Schoen. So we have to look at that as a district too. I'm on the LMC committee. I want to make sure that if we decide to go RFPs, that Ms. Ryder is on that committee too. Going through forward. So anybody else have any other questions at all at this point on anything on this? I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and we could be here quite a while, but probably something we should revisit again soon as we go forward. So
Yeah, can you keep us posted on our RFP process?
yeah, we'll report at the next board meeting
Okay, thank you.
because it's at 4:00 next on the 18th. That's our LMC meeting. So happy to do that. So hearing nothing else, we have a busy regular meeting coming up here. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Logan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Logan.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Motion, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Rowe, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Schoenfeld. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, Logan. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Talk to you soon.
Goodbye. All board members are present this evening, except Ms. Ossendorf, who had another commitment, along with Superintendent Wagner. We have the meeting agenda. Is there any additions or anything that anybody wishes to add or take off the agenda at this time?
Yes,
Go
I
ahead.
would like to make a motion to add a transportation discussion to the agenda.
Under business items?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it under, we'll do it 3A under Personnel Committee and Finance Committee. We'll do it underneath that one. Is
Won't
there,
take long.
it won't take long, good. Is there anybody else have anything? With that, I'll entertain a motion to accept the amended agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Bjornsted, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Schoenfelder. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. We are now, Ms. Ryder, our next agenda item is truth and taxation hearing. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Tonight is the annual event in which every school district in the state must have a truth and taxation hearing with their public. And so that is what the next few minutes will be about. The truth and taxation is a public hearing for this year, taxes that are payable in 2024. I would ask that, Lisa, if you could pull up the slide presentation that is included in the board packet. As she's doing that, this is a process. The development of this truth and taxation hearing is some result of the information that you heard in September that you then are going to approve here in December as final, which is for payable 24. And as we get into this more, you'll see kind of the timing of how this all kind of fits together and really is impactful for our budget for fiscal year 25 that we were also talking about just a little bit ago with regard to the audit. So as we take a look at the presentation that you have within your packet and for the public to view, the next page talks about the overview. There are certain things that you must include within your truth and taxation hearing. And so we will cover all four of these topic areas within this presentation. To begin, next slide, please. We want to start talking about the backgrounds on school funding and some of the intricacies that are kind of unique to schools. And so one of the things we want to talk about is how much of this information that we work with is actually predetermined for us. The state legislature and the governor's administration, together, they often are the ones to set those formulas. They are the ones to set the formulas which determine our revenue. Our revenue can come from either levy and or state, as well as federal funds, right? But we're really focusing on that levy and state component. And oftentimes, a formula will result in something that's going to be split between the two. So the state will kick in some dollars, but the rest is going to be paid for through levy with our taxpayers, okay? So those formulas are all set by the state legislature and the governor's administration. Similarly, any tax policy for local schools, they determine that information. They also determine our maximum authorized property tax levy that we really can't change unless we have something that is approved by the voters that happens between September and December, okay? And they authorize the school board to be able to submit for referendums for operating and capital needs that may require voter approval, okay? So all of that is managed and really driven by our state legislature and governor's administration. Our next slide indicates what is it that the school board does. So school boards make the decisions to participate in various different programs. These are the programs that our children are attending or part of or see the benefit of. And typically these are all financed primarily by state and or levies. Sometimes it's federal aid, but mostly what we're talking about is the general fund, state and levy. The school board also asks the voters to approve a referendum. So that is also under the school board's purview. Only decreasing of the levy from September to December is allowed by the school board unless you have an election in the middle that happens in November, okay? So there's only certain things that can change between September and December when it comes to our levy. And that's only going to be those things that you're actually going to say, do what they call under levying. It's not often districts do that, but it is a potential activity that the school board could engage in. So those two slides kind of just share with you kind of who makes those decisions and how much of this is really at your discretion, right, as a school board. As we turn to the next slide, it kind of lays out the calendars, right? So our legislature met beginning last January through May. Typically, they wrap up their business. Sometimes, as we know, that can slide over into a couple more months, right, depending upon how successful they are in actually getting things passed through. So with that legislation happening between January and May, then you've got from June through December in which there's interpretation of those state law changes. So what does that mean then for formulas that need to come out in our levy sheets? What does it mean for implementation at school district level? What does it mean for the various different components that are necessary in order to fulfill that state statute? While that's happening, we have two things to consider here. Individuals' tax statements not only include the district information, the school district information, it also includes the city and the county or township information. We have different calendars between the city, township, and counties. They are calendar based. So typically when you have this legislation that is being implemented, that tax levy decision is being interpreted, but then employed for the cities, the tax townships, and the county. They do that all calendar year. So right away, January through December, that's when it's implemented in 2024. When you're talking school districts, that looks different. For school districts, we receive this information and we will submit our data to the state in end of December. The dollars will be collected during calendar 2024, but for us, it will become our revenue for fiscal year 25, which begins July of 24 and runs through June of 2025. So there's a slight change and shift there as to when we as school districts use these funds and those decisions become imperative versus how a city, township, or county would respond. Our next slide talks a little bit more about our general education formula. This is something that you hear often talked about when you're talking about the legislature and what are they going to do with the gen ed formula. One thing that I think is really important to look at here is everyone talked about how much money was coming to school districts with a 4% increase on the formula. But when you look at this slide, you can see the red line at the bottom is our general education formula. And there is a 4% increase from 2023 to 2024, okay? However, look at what's happening when you consider inflation, and that is the blue line. We are further apart with what we would have been at if we were receiving inflationary increases compared to where we are now than we were 4 years ago. That gap has just grown extensively. And so that is really critical for us to understand. Yes, it's nice to receive the 4% increase on that formula, but look what we're up against. And we are seeing those cost increases no matter what we do too, as is every other taxpayer as well, right? So I just wanted to point this out. This slide is something that is prepared for and offered up by Ellers, and it is very useful to see that year over year and what that gap is starting to do. All right, next slide. We are now moving into the second part of our 4 parts that we have to cover. The second part is really more information on our school budget. So recently in the newspaper, we submitted this particular form, which is called the Expenditure and Revenue Expenditure Report, or Revenue and Expenditure Report. And it requires that we publish in the newspaper at least a week after our audit or by November 30th, whichever comes first. So we put it into the paper for the weekend right before the end of the year. And it shows you the fiscal year 23 that we have had audited with our beginning fund balances. The second column of numbers is our revenues and transfers in. The next column is our expenditures and transfers out with an ending fund balance that ties to our financial audit as of June 30, 2023. This is broken down by our general fund broken into restricted, and then the next line being other. You then see our food service fund, our community service fund, our building construction fund, our debt service fund. There is an internal service fund identified there, but there we only show ending balances. We don't show the activity in between. And then you see the OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits for our trust, as well as then the debt related to it. Those totals then, this is a standard form every school district must complete and include as publication to our public. We're bringing it up here again as a summary of all of our information for both things. Our fiscal year audited data for fiscal year 23, as well as the last three columns, which show our current year's adopted budget for revenues, expenditures, and what we're projecting that fund balance to look like. So this kind of is a summary form page that gives all this information to those interested and can see that broken down then by our funds, as well as what we are anticipating those fund balances to look like at this point in time. This will change as we revise the budget for fiscal year 24, okay? Next slide is a reflection of our enrollment. This enrollment projection was provided to you prior to the adoption of the 24 budget and will be updated before we revise our budget for 24. So this is reflective of what was used to both build as well as the assumptions made for the audit. Now, some of the audited numbers are slightly different from what you see here because this is what was prepared for the preparation of your adopted budget, and it was a projection at that time for 23. But the key is to look at the 2024, and those are the numbers that were used then for development of the budget that we have currently in place. As we take a look at the next slide, we're still talking now about our budget, and I just wanted to be able to provide for you a graph that shows you, okay, what does the audited 23 revenues look like compared to our current year's budget? And so what you're seeing here is on the left, the adopted budget, current year, and on the right is the audited financial revenues for the fiscal year 23. They look very similar. There are slight differences between our state aids, where we are a little less, a little bit more in our fiscal year 24 than what we saw audited. And you see that that fluctuates with the property taxes. Otherwise, it's very, very close, but down a percentage when you're talking about our federal funds and other funds. So very similar in nature. You're not seeing a big swing one way or the other versus how we're receiving those revenues or what we're projecting for this current fiscal year as well. The next slide then talks about the expenditures. Again, comparing on the expenditures, the top slide is going to be our adopted budget, current year, whereas the bottom left side part of the slide is the audited fiscal year 23 expenditures. Here again, this is breaking it down by what's salaries and benefits, what's purchased services, general supplies, capital expenditures, and debt service. You're going to see very similar colors, right? And very similar parts of that pie chart showing in the various different categories. Essentially, you have about 67% that is clearly salaries and benefits, no matter which way you look at it, both in the expended final budget, or excuse me, the current budget, as well as the final 23 expenditures. So not a lot of differences expected between 23 and 24 given our current budget. This again will be revised as we revise our budget in the future. As we leave that slide and move on to this next one, we are now moving into the third part of the required components for tonight's discussion. We're now going to be starting to talk more about our proposed tax levy for taxes payable 2024. This is the timeline. Back in September is when we received what we call our levy sheets from the state of Minnesota. Every district gets them. And as you receive these are filled with formulas as to how the revenue is going to be calculated, how much of it's going to be borne by our taxpayers, and how much is going to be state aid. All of that information was received on September 10th. We worked to clarify any errors or mistakes or assumptions that were being made that we needed to modify. All of that was done so that by September 30th, we had reported to the state all of the final information. And in the meantime, the school board took action to approve at what we call the maximum. So whatever those formulas showed as of September 30th then is what we were going to be working with moving forward as we now move into the next phase, which in mid-November, people receive their property tax statements. Those property tax statements were based off from that information summarized and finalized as of September 30th. With that having been done, if you had an election in November, that potentially could change what that property tax statement would look like in the end for actuals. We did not have any such election, so our numbers should not change much at all. Then December 4th, that's today, we're having our public hearing for the truth in taxation. This gives an opportunity for taxpayers to also ask if they have any questions of us that can be shared at that point in time. December 18th is our next school board meeting, at which point in time there is a request for you to approve and certify the final tax levy for the payable 2024 year. Again, that will begin our process then for development of the 2025 fiscal year budget. So that's the timeline and how this all lays out and what the importance is of these numbers as we go forward. So the next slide then takes us into a comparison. How does the payable 2024 look when you compare it to the 2023 levy? And so as you can see here in the payable 2023 levy, we received 11,206,982 compared to what we're now seeing in our payable 24 levy, 10,819,487. There is a decrease planned here of 387,495. That is approximately 3.46% of a decrease in total levy that we're asking for from the taxpayers when you compare payable 24 to payable 23. We're going to get into the reasons why in the next few slides. So this next slide takes a look at these now just for the general fund. I will take note of the fact that there's one area, which is the ice arena levy, that we do not include in our presentation for the general fund because we include it in the community ed fund. So you'll see that slight difference if you were comparing this document to exactly what the state shows on our documents. For the general fund, we have the payable 23 column that is finalized a year ago by you in December to compare to the 2024 payable that is before you and for discussion this evening. The equity and referendum and local optional revenue, those first three lines are very, very similar in nature. They just have different formulas. Essentially, it's your referendum dollars, okay? And so you can see there's a little bit of a swing there, but really the decrease is largely there going to be a result of change in enrollment numbers, okay? When you're taking a look at the operating capital, that's a formula change. How much of it's going to be state aid versus how much is going to be levy. That changed for us, and so that is reflective there. The achievement and integration is a situation where in 1 year we are eligible for it, and in the next we are not, and so then they're taking back some of those funds. And so that's the reason why you see such a swing there of that 237,000. As that formula, that aid, they don't call it a grant, but that particular program is determined based upon information about our student population and when you meet a certain threshold in comparison to districts surrounding you. And so that is an annual review of those numbers. And when you've levied for it in 1 year because you estimate, and then it's not something you're actually eligible for, they have to take it back then. And so those are what we call adjustments, and they do happen from time to time on various programs. So that is the reason why you're seeing a negative 237,000. And that's a large part of the reason why you're seeing such a decline in the general fund levy compared to the previous year. The next line is the reemployment. Oops, sorry. Let's go back a slide, sorry. There we go. On the general fund, the reemployment line, we had an actual reduction in the payable 23, which is reflective of the fact that we had levied for something but didn't incur those costs because of the pandemic and how those funds were being managed by the state. So we had a big negative in 23, whereas now in 24, these are more our real numbers because we do have to start paying those bills now again. And so that's where you're seeing that jump from negative 40 to positive 57 shows as if it's an increase of 97,000, but just know that's a result of that year-to-year comparison, okay? Career technical is a little bit less than it is showing in 23. We spend quite a bit on career technical, but the amount that we can levy is capped at a certain level. As you take a look at long-term facilities maintenance, those funds are a little bit down from what they were in payable 2023. That's all about our plan that we bring before you on an annual basis and is a 10-year plan out, okay? So in whole, the general fund is down about $306,580. And that's the summary of the general fund. As we take a look at the next slide, please. The next slide should be the community service. We go the other direction. Oops, we're going the wrong way. There we go. So the community service fund here, as we take a look at this, we're going to see that the ice arena is now included in the community service fund. As you take a look at the basic community education line, which is the first line of numbers, you're going to see that's a slight increase there, but otherwise very similar in nature. The ice arena is down, and this is reflective of how much of our costs that exceed our revenue in the ice arena then gets put forward in the levy for inclusion in the levy. And so that's down compared to the previous year. Our early childhood family education number, this is reflective of population as well as formula changes. And so that's down slightly, kind of offset though by the community education revenue. So in total, the bulk of the reason why your community services fund is less than it was in the previous year is really going back to that ice arena cost being less, okay? Our next slide is the general debt service and OPEB fund. Remember, that's other post-employment benefits. And so as you take a comparison here, this is very similar from one year to the next. In total, it's down about $9,000 or $8,500. Not much. And this is really the dollars that we need to levy in order to cover our principal and our interest costs related to any of our debt, including the debt for the other post-employment benefits, okay? All right, so then in summary of the levy dollars, we have our reasons for the decreases in our total levy. We remember are down approximately 3.46%, a total of $387,495 compared to the previous year. That decline is primarily due to these three reasons. We talked about achievement and integration levy that was fluctuating for us. We talked about the lesser amount of the ice arena levy required, and we talked about the enrollment projections resulting in lesser funds for referendum particularly. So that summarizes the comparison of our payable 24 to our payable 23. Our next phase of the discussion is going to be around the next 6 slides, which are intended to help our public understand, okay, fine, our taxes are down some. What does it mean for me individually as a taxpayer and what I have to pay? So these slides are broken down into different categories. This first slide is the market value of homestead residential property. So if you are a residential property owner with a homestead within our school district, this is what we're looking at as a comparison when you take a look at the various different valuations: 150,000, 200,000, 265, 700, 350,000, and a 500,000 value of home. The 265, 700 is the median home value based upon the U.S. Census Bureau that you see at the very top. So taking a look at these values, if we were to look at what the taxes were for payable 23 compared to payable 24, how do they compare? And so you can see that in all cases, you've already heard our levy is down. That means it should be down for taxpayers as well. Now, that's not to say that a taxpayer's statement may say 150,000 one year and the next year it might be 170,000. If there's a valuation increase in that property, that is not reflected here, right? So you have to keep that in mind. This is assuming the value were staying the same. What would the taxes look like? Okay. Similar concepts are going to be used on the next 5 slides. They're just different categories of property. So let's take a look at the next slide, which is going to be our evaluation of commercial and industrial property. So all very similar information, comparing the payable 23 to 24, taking a look at the various valuations. In this case, we're taking a look at commercial and industry property that is 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, and $1 million. What do those numbers look like from comparison from one year to the next? The next slide talks about the category of apartments. The market value of apartments, 4 or more units on the property, and making this comparison as well for the same levels of valuation as we had just seen, 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, and 1 million. Our next slide looks at the category of seasonal, recreational, residential property. So if you are a taxpayer where that is your property, seasonal, it's recreational, and it's residential, this may apply to you. And so you can kind of see how those numbers compare. There are different rates under the state's tax system for property taxes, and therefore that's why the need for the different slides for you. And our next slide is talking about the market value of agricultural homesteaded property. Again, similar comparisons, payable 23 to 24, making this information available to our public so that they have an understanding of what our tax levy looks like. And our last slide for these comparisons encompasses our market value of agricultural that is non-homesteaded property. Similar information, just different group of taxpayers. Our next slide then, we have moving away from these graphs that talks about the various categories and talking about the fact that there are many factors that can cause taxes to go up or down for an individual homeowner or taxpayer. It can be the change in value of their individual property that makes a big difference. It can be a change in the total value of all the property in the district, because there's, if for some reason the valuation of all of our property is larger, that means we have more dollars to spread the same, in our case, a little bit less dollars of that levy. So the tax impact to any one particular individual may be less and much greater less, right? So it all depends on that. The increases or decreases in our own individual levy amounts also creates that total compared to one year to the next, whether we're increasing or decreasing. So with those factors in mind, just know that these slides that we have shown are estimates based upon the valuations we've talked about, and they may not be exact to your circumstances as a property owner. Our next slide talks about the fact that there is a possible property tax refund, particularly if you are a resident taxpayer on a fixed income. We do encourage you to take a look with a tax professional as to whether or not you are eligible for property tax refunds that may exist for you. So please take a look at that, particularly if you are on a fixed income. Our next slide talks about what's next. The next board action is required by the end of December. And so our board meeting is December 18th, and the Board of Education will be asked at that point in time to certify the final levy for the payable 2024, which is funding our school year for fiscal year 2025. And our last part of this presentation that must be made available is the opportunity for public comment and questions.
Before I open it up to public comment, are there any questions by the board members? No? Okay, so everybody in the audience and public that is here tonight wish to come forward and speak on the truth and taxation hearing? I say it 3 times, so get used to it. Is there anybody in the audience that wish to come forward and speak at the truth and taxation hearing this evening? Hearing nothing, one more time, anybody wish to come forward and speak at the truth and taxation hearing in the public schools? Okay. Well, I don't think we need to, I suppose you should close the public hearing for that. We then go into the public hearing, where we should probably close the truth and taxation hearing at this point by motion, and then go over to our regular board agenda.
I'll make a motion to close the truth and taxation hearing.
Motion by Ms. Schoenfelder, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Tiff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Ryder, very
Thank
good. All right, we'll move along here. Our educational plan is in the corner, and I will read the mission statement this evening. The mission of the Red Wing Public Schools to educate and inspire all students as they realize their full potential, become respectful, responsible, and productive citizens. And with that, recognitions and upcoming events. But yeah, Ms. Bjornstam.
The Black Student Union at the high school is holding a clothing drive, winter clothing drive. There are boxes to donate in the upper J and H pod and the lower J and H pod. And I was looking on Instagram, I don't see an end date on that.
Okay.
Does anyone? So, and also the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee is doing a winter clothing drive for new or gently used winter coats, hats, mittens, gloves, snow pants, scarves, any other winter gear. All sizes from baby to adult are needed and appreciated, and they're also gathering new toys or Christmas gifts for children and families in need. They'll be delivering this to the Pine Ridge Reservation. And they're collecting these items from now until December 15th, and you can drop them off in any Red Wing Public School office or at the Prairie Island Education Building.
Anybody else? Some of us attended the World's Best Cafe. What was that called? World Cafe.
It was the best.
It was the best one. It was very good. So thank you for everybody that attended. Very nice, it was very good. Hearing nothing else, we'll continue on. Public comment. Superintendent Wagner, did you get any requests? Anybody signed up back there for public comment? I don't believe so. Is there anybody here present that wants to make public comment? None? Okay, we'll move along. I received nothing either. Student and school showcase. Mr. Bagel.
They're all super excited.
They didn't come up and speak.
Yeah, they'll all come up here in a moment. You're only stuck with me for a very short
The
period of time.
last one, we had like experiments going.
I know, yes, I saw that. I was like, thanks, Bierman, because now I've got to follow up with that. Yeah, we thought about some dance, but decided against it. So I want to take a few minutes just to kind of introduce our crew here. So I'm Mike Peglam, I don't want to be superintendent, principal at Sunnyside. And as we're thinking through kind of what to present, one of the things that popped in was talking a little bit about the letters training that several of our teachers volunteered to do last year, and some of the really cool things that we're seeing out of that. So I have 4 people that are going to come up here, correct? Kate Safe, Megan Dahman, Amy Pearson, and Gabby Hartnick. So 2 reading interventionists and 2 first grade teachers. So Lisa, if we could go to the next slide, just a little bit of background, that's my part here. So last fall, MDE offered out letters training. Letter stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling, because we love acronyms. Free of charge to any elementary educators willing to put forth the effort to do it. And when I say effort, I mean effort. It was a lot of effort. So it was about 140 hours total, and a mix of some reading, some modules online, and then some live online 3-hour sessions. And so it was a lot. It was a lot for folks to commit to. And it's based on the science of reading. And so really a heavy emphasis on foundational skills, which is exactly where Sunnyside lives, right? So it was a good fit for us, but it was a big commitment. So I do want to very much thank the folks in my building that did volunteer to do this really on their own time, because it was a lot. Next slide, please. So at Sunnyside, last year we had 2 first grade teachers, 3 special education case managers, 2 interventionists, our student support coordinator, and myself that all completed the training last year. And currently, the rest of our K-4 classroom, special education, and intervention teachers are completing a version of letters training this year and next. So that's where at the elementary level, that's where our professional development has really landed. As it turns out, we were kind of ahead of the game a little bit because this ended up being one of the requirements that came out of the READ Act that was passed this spring. So I actually feel like we're in pretty good shape there. So one thing I want to clarify before going to the next slide is our teachers, my teachers at Sunnyside, have always worked really, really hard. So this is not about effort. This is not about, folks aren't pulling their weight or anything along those lines. Our folks work really, really hard. But what this is we want to just make sure that we're working hard on high leverage practices and following what the science is telling us. And that really is what letters was about. So very early returns, but now we'll go to the next slide, Lisa. So as we look at this, this is kind of looking at our FastBridge fall to spring growth for the past several years since the 16-17 school year. And as you can see, generally speaking, we've had some pretty modest gains in the number of students that are at the low risk range moving from fall to spring. I've got the 2 years asterisk there at the 2021 and 21-22, as if any of us could forget it. Those were the COVID years. So those are kind of a different size subset because my building only had 2 first grade teachers compared to the 8 that we normally have. So last year, 22-23, in the first grade overall, we saw a 6% increase in the percentage of students that were at low risk on FastBridge from fall to spring. Our letters trained teachers saw an average of 19% growth. So that's, I mean, we're talking triple, that's significant, which is really cool. And then also just as a snapshot from our intervention program, in kindergarten, our ADSIS readers, we saw a growth of 34% that were performing at the low risk range from fall to spring. So those are pretty, like I said, early returns, but really encouraging numbers. And so I'm really excited as we go forward with this training this year and into next year. And the folks that are sitting behind me here are kind of leading the charge in terms of how do we help all of our teachers grab hold of the things we're learning with letters and impact the classroom so that we're seeing the growth that we want to really see with kids. So that's all I have to say. So I'm going to pass it on over to, I think, Amy and Gabby are going to come up next and talk a little bit about their experiences.
Welcome. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Amy Pearson. I teach first grade. I've taught here for a long time, a few years. I'm one of the new employees.
I'm Gabby Hartneck. I also teach first grade, and I believe this is my 7th year in the district, 6th or 7th. If you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of what I took away from letters. So the biggest takeaway that I had was the need for explicit instruction with students. When I was going through college and even pursuing my master's, I think the biggest piece that was missing was the how. So letters really provided me with the understanding of how, why, and when. How being really kind of looking at mouth movements. So the example I can give is with V and F, you make the same mouth movement for each letter, except V has the voiced sound where you turn your vocal cords on, and F is more of the non-voiced or not voiced. Y, we talk a little bit at first grade about the soft C and the soft G rules. Students learn that with C and G, they can make 2 different sounds, but it just depends on what letters they're next to. So if they're next to an I, E, or Y, they'll make their soft sounds. And then the when. So we also talk a lot about long vowels in first grade. And one of the areas that students learn about is AI and AY. So giving students that explicit understanding that AI will always come in the middle of a word, like in train, or AY will come at the end, like in play. I've seen just a huge gain in understanding through helping students understand each of those areas. One of the things that I have utilized in my classroom from letters is what you see on the screen. They're called sound boxes. We word map daily and weekly in our classroom. And it just provides a multi-sensory approach for all students to be able to understand those phonemes at their most basic level and put them together to build words and sentences.
Awesome. And then if you would go to the next slide. The biggest takeaway that I said was phonemic awareness and phonics. And I'm not saying that that was my big aha, that I was like, oh, I need to teach phonics, because I've taught phonics since I started teaching in Red Wing. But our district kind of went away from really explicitly teaching phonics for a long time. And the aha was, yes, we do need this. We do need this. Kids need to have the phonics, the relationship between the letters and sounds, and knowing which letters together make which sounds. And there are digraphs and there are consonant clusters, and we put names to them so that the kids can identify them and they can see them. Like she was talking about the AI and the AY, learning the rules, but just learning that those together make those different sounds, and the phonemic awareness. Today in my class, we were doing some alliteration, and I was thinking way back to like when I was a child in school, and we would talk about like those, I won't be able to say it, she sells at the seashore, and all of those, and the, learning about those sounds, but why are we doing that, and what is the impact that we can give the kids, and it's short and it's fast, and you can do things in 5 minutes a day. We do a quick rhyming thing in my room. You'll see that first slide. That's actually from the top of the picture is from the Bridge to Read, which is a section of letters which provides materials for any teacher who wants them. And it's just a quick thing that we run through in our daily thing. We go 10, 10. Do they rhyme? Thumbs up. Thumbs down if they don't. And it's 5 minutes, and it gets them to think and to hear and to listen. And the other one that I really liked in my classroom practices is the decodable passages. That is one thing that has really, really helped the students learn how to read and feel successful. They can figure out the sounds, they build on them. Eventually, yes, they become words that they can read quickly, but if a student has to learn to read by sight, there are way too many words in this world for people to learn to read on sight, and to take that away and to give them these tools is what really helps them become successful.
Thank you.
Well, you covered everything you were going to say.
We'll go ahead and welcome and introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Kate Safe. I teach ADSYS reading at Sunnyside, so to our kindergarten and first graders.
And I'm Megan Dom, and I'm Title I reading for kindergartners and first graders.
And can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as we were moving throughout the letters process, we reflected on a lot. A couple years ago, we kind of had to shift some of our interventions, and we focused hard on choosing interventions that were phonemic awareness and phonics focused. I adopted WonderWorks and started doing YouthLive Foundations.
And we, in Title, it was probably about 3 years ago, we realized that we were using a program called LLI, and it was a well-used program. It was a really nice program, but it wasn't hitting the phonics and phonemic awareness that we needed. So we looked at a program called Washika, and it's heavily phonics-based. And now we've added the Bridge to Reading, like Amy talked about, that we received through the letters training. So we focus solely at K-1 on the phonemic awareness and phonics.
And as we moved through the training, we were kind of reassured that these decisions were right and the interventions we chose were kind of hitting the target. With that said, I feel like doing the letters training has really enhanced the way the interventions are delivered. I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the actual what are we using and the programming, but with this training, I feel like I could better deliver any of the programming that I'm given. I know what the important pieces are. I know where to spend my time. Gabby kind of covered what I was going to say with, I think for years we were telling students, this is P, P stands for P, where now I know how important it is for them to know where it's made and how it's made. And then I finally feel confident in when there is an error, knowing why they're making it and telling them right away how to fix it. And I think when I look now over the last year and a half with that knowledge, the confidence in the students that I think would have really struggled had I not known how to help them with those errors is pretty impactful. Gabby and I shared a student last year that went from he could write 4 sounds at the beginning of first grade, and he left and was confident and was reading, and he might still struggle, but he left with a solid foundation. And I think, that aha of it is making our students more confident, and it is aligning us as teachers and making us feel like we know what we're doing better than we did before has been really impactful.
It's very apparent when the students come from the 2 classrooms that had the training. They're able to tell us the rules before we even begin to tell it to them. Or if they're writing a word, they'll stop and say, oh, I have to put the double L because this is the floss rule. So they're able, even in first grade, to articulate what they're learning back in the classroom, which I think is really a neat thing for those young kids. And then also there is a podcast out. We had a teacher last year, a veteran teacher, and she just came down bawling one day, and she had listened to it on the way to school, and she's like, I can't believe this has happened for the last, 10 years. And it's called Sold a Story. It's super interesting just about how reading has changed now with the science of reading, how it's evolved. So if you're ever looking for
We
something,
should all listen to
yeah,
it. It's disturbing.
it is. It really is.
See, you did have more to say. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
And Kate, before you leave, and Megan, before you leave. So I've been able to be in all of classrooms here. Last year, the most telling story, I think Emily was with me. Kate chased us down the hall. We are doing. And I was brand new, so it was kind of a shock, but their passion is infectious. Amy, I was in your classroom last year to watch your circle, and the kids are so engaged, like they have self-agency, and so thank you for that. And Gabby, I've been able to be in your room and look at your awards that you give yourself and the excitement that you have for kids, but I just want to say thank you to all four of you. I know it's not easy, but you're very dedicated, and I see that, so thank you.
And I'll just say, as their building principal, I just had a chance, I was in Gabby's room last week. I spent time each, and it always amazes me, in a 15, 20-minute snapshot in the classroom, how much they are able to pack into that. It's rapid fire. Kids are engaged, kids are moving. It's really cool to watch.
Well, on behalf of the board, thank you very much for taking on the letters. I mean, like Mr. Bagel said, it was quite a commitment on your own. And I know Emily I believe you're involved in all that too. And we think the world of it, and we appreciate the dedication that you put into it, and it has not gone unnoticed. Superintendent Wagner even talked about it. So thank you very much for sharing your story with us tonight and for all you did. Thank you. And I'll just have to say, I saw the passion and the excitement in your eyes too as you sat up here tonight. So, I mean, that means a lot to us here, because you hear about, kids around the country not struggling at reading, and then we're here, we're doing what we can to help some of them get that even better learners. So, thank you.
I do have to interject one thing, as being one of the older teachers and the staff.
Nobody said that.
We were doing, I'm sorry, I wasn't really one of those. We do they were talking about the floss rule. So in our classroom, when we get to the floss rule, the double 11s at the end, we stand up and we do the floss dance. So, but I was told by my students that I just can't do it. Do the floss dance.
You need to at least explain to them what the floss is. Why it's called that.
Well, the floss rule is FLS, and then sometimes the UU is the doubling the consonants after a short accent involved in the word, so that they know when to use those two S's. But yeah, I absolutely am unable to floss, according to my whole class of first graders.
Her kids did floss when they were with me, though, when they were writing it down.
They can floss.
They can.
Sometimes the honesty hurts a little bit. So, thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
All right, we'll move on to school board reports. Anybody have any school board reports? We through the Thanksgiving holiday, there wasn't much going on there. Administrative reports.
All right, I'm sure you will all be brokenhearted, but there is no Wagner Wednesday this month. We took the month off. It will be returning in January, however. So that quick update. One piece that I don't have in here is that I had the luxury of meeting with Site Logic. So a few board sessions ago, the request was to do a potential facility study. So I was able to meet with Andrew, who was a former administrator in Stillwater Schools, who now works as a consultant. And so at our next board meeting, Site Logic will be doing an overview of their services. So there are 16 potential services that they've done with schools around the state. What was nice about his presentation to me is he found like school districts, our size, kind of our budget allocation. And so he will be with us on the 18th to kind of talk through what facilities look like. I did talk through the wish of the board to really look at grade level configurations. What he highlighted is what goes together with grade level configurations and facility studies is also programming. The other thing that he highlighted is he noticed, he had done his research and said, he noticed declining enrollment, and they can do a deeper dive into why is that happening, what's the narrative, what's the story, and so I just look forward to having him come in and talk a little bit more, what that looks like and feels like for our own specific facility study. So more to come on Wagner Friday updates for all of you to read, but for purposes of today, that's Wagner Wednesday and then the site project update.
Very good. Any questions? All right, move to the consent agenda. 5 things on the consent agenda. If you have any questions, otherwise I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Ms. Schoenfelder moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Rowe. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We've got donations and grants.
Yeah, we have 2 donations. I think you'll have to help me with some of the pronunciation of the second one, but the first one is from Lori Sonic in the amount of $87.47 for Early Child Family Ed Dinner. And the second one is 5 copies of Voices from the Dakota Stories and Storytellers, but there's one word right before that. ZZ. So we have 5 copies donated by the Shakopee and Metawakanton Sioux community through Understanding Native Minnesota campaign. So thank you for your donations.
Very good. Thank you very much for the generous donations. Everybody that you mentioned. I'll start with Ms. Schoenfelder. Oh, we need a motion to approve the resolution first.
I will make a motion to approve the resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Tiff. Is there a second?
I'll second
Ms. Bjornsted, and we'll start with Ms. Bjornsted.
Aye.
Ms. Buck?
Aye.
Ms. Tiff?
Aye.
Ms. Schoenfelder?
Aye.
Ms. Rowe?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you very much. Well, at work clinic. Well, it's still there or not, but
That one's already done.
we're already done?
Placed there as a
Just in
placeholder.
case.
Huh?
It was put there as a placeholder. We didn't get to it.
But anybody else, it's on, it's up here. Does anybody have anything they want to mention more? I think was asked, I think kind of hit around, is it cost effective? And we'll ask that question to Ms. Ryder, Superintendent Wagner, and myself at the next LMC committee, and we'll report back on the 18th. How's that sound? We'll go forward then with World's Best Workplace. Good evening, welcome.
Hello.
Introduce yourselves again, and for everybody out there watching, just on the edge of their seats, waiting for this report.
Thank you for that warm introduction. I'm Allegra Slushek, Director of Teaching and Learning and Assistant Superintendent.
I'm Emily Seafeld, Teaching and Learning Coordinator and the District Assessment Coordinator.
So this evening, we will be presenting our annual report for the World's Best Workforce. I believe this is the first time I've ever looked forward to this report in my life. There's some context for you. We will be presenting 4 of what was previously 5 goals because of the redact. The literacy goal that typically is part of this report has kind of been like rescinded temporarily from the state. So we will be presenting on 4 goals. I am very grateful to my colleague Emily for all of her work as the district assessment coordinator in preparing this report and working with the rest of the teaching and learning team. Historically for me, this report has felt somewhat like a box to check. But what I have learned this year is you can see and feel the goals in this report in the classroom if you are very intentional about alignment. So I appreciated the great work that Martina and Emily did in this report last year to kind of grow from. And we really went over the building vision cards with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that every school's vision card was represented within this report so that each school will feel and see the World's Best Workforce goals in the work that they do with our students.
It can be somewhat difficult to review data. I think it's really important for us to be transparent about data so that we can target our improvements. When we presented to you earlier this fall about MCA data, I talked about street data versus satellite data. The data included in this report is very much that satellite data, so we'll be looking at sort of the 30,000 foot view. But it is important for informing programmatic changes, systemic changes, and identifying high leverage adult actions to improve our student outcomes. It also helps point us in the direction of like map and street data. So if there's a red flag somewhere, then we know like, oh, what's going on there? We need to dig in more to figure out how we can improve.
The first one.
Let's go.
So the first performance measure is actually all students are ready for school. It's a little bit different to report on that because we welcome the students as kindergartners. We don't necessarily have them prior to kindergarten. And currently in Red Wing, and the most recent data on this is from 2017. So I would be interested to know what it is right now. Back in 2017, only 35% of students in Red Wing attend preschool. And that is the most current time that they have done that data. So we don't have anything since COVID. So we base it off of our early reading data that we get in the fall of kindergarten, and we make a spring goal. So if you look at last year, we had a 51% composite when kindergartners came, and then spring did go down to 45%. You're going to see our goal for this year looks a little bit different with some subtests. So one thing that's interesting about early reading, which is what kindergarten and first grade does from FastBridge, is the subtests change throughout the year. So it does give a composite score, and that's really, really important, but it isn't testing apples to apples throughout the year. So it changes that. What you're going to see, some alignment that we did, and this is in relation to FastBridge and also some new requirements from the READ Act with dyslexia screening, is they're going to actually have 4 subtests that stay the same going from fall to spring. So you can really track that data. You'll still have your overall composite, but we can track the growth of those individual subtests. You will see right now that there's only 2 for this year's World's Best Workforce. That is because the state didn't release the required subtests per the READ Act until after we did fall testing. So when you see World's Best Workforce next year, you're going to see those 4 subtests. These right now are the 2 subtests that we will have consistently from fall to spring, and then that'll increase next year. So you can see where our kindergartners this year came in. The overall composite was 46%, letter naming was at 45%, and then letter sounds was at 44% as well. Some things that you're going to be seeing us this year as well. Sunnyside mentioned we do have K4 general education and special education teachers in year 1 of letters training right now. They started during workshop week. Next school year, early childhood letters, which is a different version of letters. It's a 1-year training. Traditional letters is 2 years. Will be started by all of our staff, teaching staff at Colville Family Center. So they will start early childhood letters as well next year. And I think it might be easier to ask questions as we go as opposed to at the end. So are there any questions about performance measure 1? I do hope the state does update the preschool enrollment data, because that's a really old data point right now, but that is our most recent.
And one thing I'll add to that, in terms of action steps, I think it makes more sense to think of this measure as schools are ready for all children, because we're really looking at how are we responding to the needs of students when they come to us. And personally, I just find that a more accurate and
we welcome all.
Yes, authentic wording.
I am really curious to see this year and then also next year as our teachers go through that letters training. And as Mr. Pagel said, it's not about effort. It's really about how we were trained. I'm an elementary teacher. That's what I did for over 10 years. And we were all taught and trained in college on the balanced literacy framework, which if you've listened to Soul to Story is completely false in how our brain learns to read. So it's really giving our teachers that knowledge of how the brain operates when it learns to read. Performance measure 2, we're going to report on it. It is interesting that the literacy performance measure was eliminated due to the Literacy Read Act. But the intention is there will be a replacement. They just don't have it for this first year of the Read Act. So the previous measure was all kids can read by third grade. And if you look at that, what we report each year is our MCAs for third grade. We didn't quite meet our goal, the rate of growth goal, but we have continued to grow up. I do find it really interesting. I find all data interesting that we definitely have room for improvement and growth for sure, but that we actually never saw the COVID dip here in Red Wing in third grade. So we are actually higher now in 2023 than we were in 2019 from an MCA standpoint in reading in third grade. So just some updates with this as they go forward for Read Act, just to let everybody know. As I said, early childhood will start their 1-year letters training next year. K4 staff will be in year 2 of volume 2 for letters. And we also have 5th grade starting general education letters next year as well. It's a 2-year commitment once you start. And then per the Read Act, we have all special education teachers that haven't started letters this year will start it next fall. So we'll have quite a large group of staff either in volume 1 or volume 2 of letters in the fall next year. And then there is a phase 2 that addresses 6th through 12th grade teachers. Right now, the state has not put out or shared what their professional development in the science of reading will look like. Letters wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for a high school reading teacher. Special education is a little bit different because we have kids struggling to learn to read all the way up. But there will be science of reading training for high school and middle school staff as well. Other changes that came with it, as I mentioned, the change for dyslexia screening. There's some new requirements for dyslexia screening. One really nice thing is the state did say there's 2 companies you can use for your screening. You can use FastBridge or you can use Dibbles. Thankfully, we've been a FastBridge district for years, so we just need to adjust some of the assessments that we already gave. We increased, it's called CBM, it's the curriculum-based measure, and that is your fluency rate. That is now given through 7th grade here. Fall, winter, and spring, we started that in the fall as well. The comprehension assessment goes through 10th grade.
Yes.
How does the Read Act, you have to use the MCA data? Right.
For read well by third grade?
Yes.
No, so we're just reporting on last year's measurement and we base it off of MCA. It does not need to be off the MCAs. That is the measurement tool that was written for the goal last year.
Okay, so we could use, would it be more appropriate to use FastBridge data?
It can be, it really depends because they're very different measurements. So MCA is technically an accountability measurement. It should never be looked at from an individual student level. FastBridge really drives instruction. We can look at that at an individual student level. I will say, if I did actually look this up, third grade FastBridge last year, I want to say is about 16% higher than this. It was the upper 50s for proficiency for third grade in FastBridge compared to the MCAs. I will be interested to see what they replace with the literacy. They're getting rid of read well by third grade because literacy is universal in E12. So I think it'll be a more universal goal that they'll add next year. One other thing I forgot. I think we mentioned way back on MCAs back in September. The state is releasing in January 1 their list of approved curricula. One of our goals, as Leg and I will look at that list, and we would like to implement foundational phonics K1 to really provide more of those tools. Second grade as well to see what they have, but right now we honestly are just waiting. I get emails lots of times from the companies telling me they put into the state of Minnesota to be considered, but we're waiting for that approved list on January 1.
And would that be implemented the fall of 20?
If it's just the functional phonics piece, which isn't a full curriculum, it's just that phonics component to get more of those materials based on the science of reading, the goal would be next school year in the fall. And that would be K1 and 2.
Yes.
You may have said this already, but what grades will the dyslexia screening be done?
It's technically through 12th grade. They have not, at the state level, figured out what that would look like through 12th grade. Part of the issue they're running into, for example, FastBridge is only norm reference. The CBM, which is the fluency one, is what you use for dyslexia screening, is only norm reference through 8th grade. So it isn't designed to be used beyond 8th grade right now. So we're kind of in a holding pattern with that as well until the state releases what they'd like us to use, really beyond that. But we did increase because we knew it was going that way through the middle school building this year.
Okay.
Right, our next performance measure is to close achievement gaps among all student groups. As you've probably picked up on, our format is looking back and looking forward. So as we look back at our 2022-2023 goal, we increased and met our goal in the areas of reading for Black or African American students, which increased by 8.6%. We also had almost an 8% increase for reading for students on free reduced price lunch. We saw almost a 10% increase for American Indian students in math test scores as well. We saw growth, but we were short of our goal for American Indian students in reading, white students in reading, white students in math, and FRP students in math as well. We unfortunately saw a decrease in our scores for reading for Hispanic students and students that identify as 2 or more races. We also saw a decrease in the scores for math in the categories of Hispanic students, Black or African American students, and students that identify as 2 or more races.
Do we screen for dyscalculia in this? Dyslexia for math kids? I don't know.
You know what, there is not. So they do take through 10th grade AMath, which is part of the FastWord screener, but there isn't an identified dyslexia math screener yet.
Okay. Just curious.
But there, we do screen through 10th grade.
Great question.
Yes, so.
Help me remember on the MCAs, it does not meets expectations.
Does not, partial, meets, exceeds.
Okay, so I would be interested even to know, like, are we seeing movement between the
The
groups?
categories?
Yeah, because I'm assuming this is just the one category, right? We're seeing.
Yeah, it's just proficient. So if they got proficient or exceeds.
Right, so even like if somebody was low, but kind of got just above the line, I mean, we're not seeing the full picture here with these numbers.
No, it's just the proficiency level, but I can give you by the 4 category breakdown as well.
Yeah, we could bring that back.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
The progress towards proficiency.
Yeah, right, yeah, because, even.
If partial's increasing, yeah.
Because that would indicate we're on the right track.
Mhm.
Yes.
Trends.
I will say a trend that it's not on here, but we calculated it, that's helpful to know as well, is so last year, the achievement gap for racial demographics increased more than 10% across all, if we looked at that. It's still an increase, but it's smaller. So in reading, the achievement gap increased by less than 1% across all racial demographics, and then math was also less than 1%. Where our achievement gap is growing right now, it increased by 10% for students that qualify for free and reduced population, and it increased by 7% in math for that same group as well. So if we look at trends, we have one that the gap is getting smaller. The goal is that it doesn't increase, it decreases. So one is heading in the right direction because it was a 15% increase. If I look at data from last year, that's less than 1%, but we are growing in another area right now.
So we did see a slowing of a gap increase, if you will, but still highly concerning for our teaching and learning team and for our entire system. So some of the actions that we'll be taking towards our new goals for next year, we'll continue to work closely with our American Indian and Hispanic liaisons. We are working with an equity consultant, both with our district advisory committee and the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. You heard today about our letters training and the impact that's having for all students. There isn't a letters equivalent for math at this time, but we are working with the K-12 math consultant looking at our programming, and that work will guide our math curriculum review and pilot, which we are beginning this week. We'll be over 20 staff members volunteered to be part of that committee, so we're really looking forward to that work. In grades 8 and 9, we're implementing the BAR program, which has really like student by student targeted review of data and interventions. We have principals and other leaders participating in 2 cohorts related to Tier 1 instruction, which is the instruction for everyone. It's the MN MTSS cohort and the Atlas cohort, both run through MDE. So we're really dedicating a lot of time to looking at our systems and making improvements, which is kind of the next one. As you know, we're also implementing new teacher and principal development and evaluation frameworks that include specific competencies for equity and quality instruction and instructional leadership. We're expanding how we define instructional leadership to having teams at each school. So really that shared leadership model to empower teachers and other staff. And this summer and through ongoing trainings, we're increasing our data literacy as a district. So really being able to understand what our numbers say and being reflective and making targeted improvements. And we continue to have focused PD on equitable teaching practices.
Can you tell us again what BAR stands for?
Building assets, reducing risks.
Yes.
I was actually up in the middle of the night thinking about this, this measure specifically, and trying to wrap my head around it. I used to be a school social worker, and you know, I really feel like this is where our wraparound services really need to be targeted, because under the action steps, all of those, of course, are going to be very educational focused, but I feel like the social emotional piece for this group in particular to change the gaps, it's not always about education. It might be about supporting a parent, or it might be about helping a kid get an alarm clock. I mean, these are, you know, things that I'm thinking of that I've had to do in the past to help kids get to school or support parents to understand, because at the end of the day, we only have the kids for a short amount of time and then they go home to their other world. And if we don't have good partnerships, I feel like we're really kind of missing the boat here quite a lot. And I very much appreciate the collaboration with our liaisons, but I feel like, you know, if we're gonna really work with this population, I think we need to have liaisons in all of our groups, like all of our kids in this group, regardless of race, creed, color. I think these are the kids that we really need, like I said, wraparound services to think in a more global perspective. So, yes, I was thinking about this at 3:45 this morning. And, you know, if I were to wave a magic wand and be able to wish, I would love to see a lot more things in addition to all the great work that you're doing educationally. But, you know, I really feel like it's kind of a whole community group, like a whole community that needs to like wrap ourselves around these kids that are not as proficient as we would like them to be. I know, I'm not saying anything new that none of us have thought about.
No, I think that we are in agreement. And I think it's good feedback for thinking about next year. Or we could probably even still add some to this year, what our wraparound services and our goals in those areas. Certainly in school vision cards under safe and caring community, we have a lot of those aspects. And we chose not to include them here, but I think it's a good idea.
I think BAR does complement that really well. Sorry. We've been collaborating obviously with our outside agencies, and the big piece that we can consistently bring up is that how do you align to what BAR is now nationally known for to close that gap, but also be social, emotional, and wrapping around and giving opportunities for all kids, because I am not just focused on this data, I'm focused on every kid, even if they're high achieving. right? It does not mean that they're not coming and contending with other outside influences that are, they may show up successful in our system or not, just however they show up, we are ready to wrap around to that. So there are conversations, and I like that we highlighted the Safe and Caring Community, our principals have been very hard. And we're challenging our principals this year to create some key moves in both ways, to support all of the pieces in our district connection. So just to kind of highlight that, but I appreciate that you're up at 3:45 in the morning thinking about it.
Yes. Yeah, oh, okay. Yes.
I think it would be a great idea for a future workshop to have more information about BAR and how it works. There's just so much to it. It would be helpful to understand.
Yeah. I'm sure Nikki Larson would love to come into that. Performance measure 4 is all students are ready for career and college. The two main goal areas that we focused on last year that we are continuing this year are the percentage of graduates earning credit in an AP, CIS, and or concurrent enrollment. We decided to change that phrasing this year to percentage of graduates earning a credit in a course that is eligible for college credit. I was blown away by this number and kind of pushed back on Mick when he said it, like, that can't be right. But 93% of our students are either enrolled in an AP course, a CIS course, PSEO, or a course that is eligible for college credit. I've never seen a number like that anywhere. That's absolutely remarkable and something to celebrate in our community, that 93% of our students are accessing rigorous courses in their experience at Red Wing High School. The other piece that we were looking at is specifically the internships with the Flight Paths program. So 2022, 26% of 12th graders participated in that opportunity, and that increased to 32%. We didn't meet our target of 42%, but we did see an increase. And then our goal for this coming year will be a 40% participation.
Yes.
Why do you think 26%, what I've heard and what we've been presented at board meetings about the internship programs and Flight Paths, it's a wonderful program. So what do you think is the reason that only 26% of our kids participate? Is it the internships offered, or do they, what?
Yes.
My understanding from Nick did a presentation at District Advisory Committee, and it sounds like a lot of it is scheduling conflicts with kids who have full schedules, are taking those AP classes in PSEO and do not have space for internship. And then also availability. Lots of kids have interests that our community can't really provide internships for them. So I think those are two large factors.
I know we have juniors that also take internships, so they wouldn't be part of the 12th graders that do that as well. I will say that Mick does reach out, like, to try to find them. I've heard of a couple ones we've never had before. I actually have an internship, which I've never had before, because they want to be a data scientist. So they've started with me already. They're fantastic. But so that was like an approach early this year. I was like, yep, I can do the data with them. And then there's another one that came up that was very unique as well. So I know he reaches out as much as he can, but I do know scheduling becomes part of it as well.
One of the cool things he's doing is if there's not an internship, he is taking kids on tours, so that they can at least meet with people who have similar positions once or twice, so that they can have a snippet of what happens. I imagine that's not in this data, those types of things.
No, and every 12th grader does get a one-on-one meeting with Mick to do future planning, which is also a pretty incredible process to be able to do that.
Yes.
One other thing just to think about, I think with the over 90% of our students taking those classes, is, yes, that's a positive thing, but I think there can be some negative to having so many kids out of our seniors, out of our school taking PSEO. And that was a discussion that came up at our World Cafe last week. And so I think it will be something that we'll look into a little bit, but just considering the environment of the high school, when you have so many juniors and seniors that perhaps are not in a classroom, it changes the community a bit. So just another piece to that picture.
And I think that some students are taking advantage of PSEO to get some college credits without having to pay for them. And it would be interesting now that we have the revenue from this. You know, hey, kids, all you kids out there, don't be in such a hurry to be a grown-up. Enjoy school and your friends and activities, and if finances are an issue, we have an avenue now, and that's really wonderful. Because it, you know, there are some really good things.
I think it speaks to a little bit what Nikki and I had conversations about alternative pathways. So sitting down, what I like that Rick does when he ideates with kids is really to think about what they don't know about, because we tend to kind of gravitate towards things that we put in front of us. But we talked about how do we use the orchard, how do we use the land more. And once we start, if you think about reimagining Red Wing for all of the other pieces that we can offer, the arts, the outdoors, the connection to self and identity, I think we will get there, but it's an opportunity to showcase what we can do so that we have kids want to continue to come to Red Wing. That's not to say that PSEO and college and schools and all those things aren't, because that is a pathway for certain students, but we need to be creative for other pathways.
I'll just interject real quick here. I don't know if this is the right place. Well, part of it is. Mick does a wonderful job on that. And we had a young man come that worked at, I think, Great Ellis, gave us a presentation out there about a year or two ago on how much he had learned. He actually ended up working during the summer there and got some of his buddies to work there. So there's a need in the community to find the right, right fit for the students is obviously important. The other thing, I don't know if this is the right spot, but I'm gonna put it in there, you figure it, see if I'm on the right page or not. I think we see children, I call them children, are students of different schools, not just Red Wing, working part-time jobs at different places, and you give them, the bill comes to $13.42, and you give them $20.42, and they have to get their phone out to do the math. What can we do to do it in your head to figure out what you have to do? Is it going back to basically your multiplication, division, subtraction, and addition to help that? It's just like, wow. It's even if you give them $5.27 and you give them $6.27 or whatever you give them so they give you back a few change, whatever. It's like they have to go to their phone, and I see that more times than not that we do that. Is it something we're missing later on, or is it something that they get so far into algebra and geometry and calculus and all that they forget some of them don't even do the simple, easy math. So I don't know where that fits in, but it's something else that you see.
Probably a separate presentation, but.
Come on, as you get ready to graduate.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
As you're getting ready for career or college. That's where I thought it would jump in.
So one of the things that we're working on, specifically the 5th grade team chose math fact fluency as their PLC goal. So something they really wanted to focus on for, I think, life skill reasons, and also to have that sort of immediacy for processing math facts. And a lot of the current research is showing that students really need to have a conceptual understanding of the numbers versus memorization for it to stick and to be able to transfer it to other things. So I would say it is something we are looking at pretty intentionally.
Especially with our math review committee right now too.
So,
When they're intelligent children, I guess I get
Absolutely.
that. But something's missing, that some of the simple little things, even adding up, what is 22 and 13? Oh, 35, what's wrong? I'm just saying. It's just so, just throw it out there. Thank you.
our final measure, I think we both have like our passion areas. This one, I'm very passionate about. All students graduate from high school. I'm passionate about this because high school graduation is one of the highest predictors for economic stability, health, life expectancy, et cetera. So a lot of a person's future stability and happiness can be drawn like a direct line to whether or not they graduated from high school. So it's really, I see it as absolutely critical. And one of the biggest predictors of graduating is whether or not a student is credit deficient as a 9th grader. So I'm really happy that we are implementing BAR right now in 8th and 9th grade, because that's such a critical time for student achievement and to make sure that we're wrapping our arms around students. It's not that we give up on them after 9th grade, but that is a really important place to focus. A frustration I have with the goal measurement for this particular goal is that the results lag 1 year. So we are creating a goal for students that have already graduated, if that makes, it doesn't make sense.
We talked about this and
actually,
debated it, but.
So we kind of went back and forth. So the 2023 numbers have not been released yet. So you're really kind of planning for 2 years in advance, and you want to continue to see growth, but our action steps that we're taking right now will not impact next year's numbers in the World's Best Workforce Report. It'll be the following year.
Because the data exists, we just don't have it yet. And it isn't something that we can kind of guess and hand tabulate ourselves, but it follows a 4-year cohort model. So it's the formula the state uses a little bit differently than us just looking at like who graduated last year. But we won't know 2023 data till March.
Well, in looking at our 2022 data, the previous year, we did not have a high enough data set, thank you, because you need to have 10 or more students to report for American Indian or Black African American students. In 2022, we did reach that threshold with American Indian students. You can see from 2020 to 2022 that there was a significant drop. That is a very small data set, but it's still really concerning to me to see that percentage drop. And we did have a fairly large drop overall from 2021 to 2022. So yes, it's only 5 points, but for a graduation target, that is very concerning. Our percentage is very high. It's higher than the state. And yet I would love to see that go back to 93%. So we decided in some of our targets, we had active debates, but we decided that we do want to hit that target of 93% for all students across all racial groups, which may indicate a greater increase for some groups than others. One of the things we talked about is like, how did this decrease in graduation happen and not be on our radars? And we talked about how there really isn't a good process for like an exit interview with students when they choose, and that can be really challenging, right? Because students might drop out or choose not to follow a traditional path for a lot of reasons. But that was one of the things we wanted to try to create, is some sort of data collection process for students who do not graduate, just so we can be really intentional at targeting our future interventions. We also, this year, Nikki Larson, our BAR coordinator, ideated with us on how to increase communication for parents when their student is below 35% in a course. So making sure that our families and our students are not surprised at the end of a term that they are not passing. So she actually, in addition to the email contacts that go out, she
sent out paper letters to all families of students in that situation so that they would have enough time and know what resources were available to support them. So we'll see if we see a positive trend from that. BAR certainly should help with this process in terms of identifying students who are credit deficient or need other supports. And as we mentioned before, our new instructional rubric for teacher evaluation and principal evaluation. And we are seeing at least a few, and I think it'll grow, instructional leadership teams also doing walkthroughs in their schools to collect data just to see like, it isn't for teacher evaluation, but to see areas of improvement or trends within the schools in different areas depending on their goals. So those are all things that we hope will lead to an increase 2 years from now when we see this data again.
Very good. Any more questions? Well, now Pam can hopefully sleep tonight now that she's heard the presentation too. So,
I'll still be thinking about it.
all right, well, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for sharing that. Good job.
Thank you so much.
A lot of work. Personnel Committee and Finance Committee. Superintendent Wagner.
So at the agenda meeting, we dialogued a little bit about around the, what we want the personnel committee, finance committee, and I'll throw in transportation ad hoc committee, just kind of the parameters around how we want that to look and feel. It may look similar across all three, or it could look very different. I think one of the things, what we need to
vote on the world's best workforce.
I see that. We'll go back. Okay, you need that approved?
Technically no, but it was, yeah. I have to present it to you by law, and then on Thursday, we have to go to our district advisory committee, get their input, and then we must submit by December 15th. Yeah.
Oh,
It's
so
more-
we won't have a meeting before then?
No.
Or won't?
No, but we have to present it to you.
Right.
But legally, we don't have to approve it, we just need to.
We need to have awareness.
You're aware, and then we get feedback from a public meeting like the DAC on Thursday. Okay. I think the goal.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is just open dialogue around, currently the personnel committee meets as part of the agenda committee. And we bring any actionable items or other specific concerns. This is more of a open ideation of what we want it to look like at the board meeting. Similar to the finance committee, there are the finance committee meetings that are happening. It's a relatively, I think we have rebirthed the finance committee, but what it would look like and how it would show up at the board meeting. The ad hoc transportation meeting was because we do have an action item on either going for an RFP with first student or staying and negotiating the current. So this is more like, throw out your ideas, what do we want that to look like? I think one thing I put in the space at the agenda meeting is just being very cognizant of not talking about people, but positions, just to keep data privacy to the best of our ability in this session, so.
That's good.
I think that even when we're not talking about specific people, when we start talking about positions and changes, people that are watching the board meeting, staff that are watching the board meeting might, I don't want to create unnecessary fear and panic especially in these times, when if we say something that concerns a staff person to the extent that they might think they're going to lose their job, it's way too easy to go find a job somewhere else. And I think we should consider that as we move forward, if we're going to talk about personnel. I think we have to have some sensitivity to people who are currently working here.
Yes.
I agree. I think in the past, the personnel committee has been used more for budget reasons in talking about positions that might be added. And just so that we are aware and can decide whether or not those positions are appropriate, administrative positions or whatever it might be, since it is our job to vote on the budget and to understand what the
Right.
cost of those positions. I think it makes sense to have them brought to us. Also, one of the things we did talk about was the BSU advisor, and that's something, that our community is asking for. And so I think we do need to talk about those things and brainstorm how can we make that happen. And so I think we need to do both. We need to be very considerate about how we talk about it, but we also do need to talk about these things.
Yes.
So at the agenda meeting, we talked a little bit too about what is our defined role in the personnel committee? What is our goal? Historically, we've talked about positions, and then we would come to the larger board after getting all of the work, right? Martina might say, I really want to add another teacher for this reason. And we would talk about it, we would vet it out in that personnel committee, and then we would come as a committee to the larger board to vote on that. This is our recommendation, and here's why, and then get your blessing, yea or nay. That was kind of historically how that committee worked. Not necessarily, we want to hire this person for this job, or that we want to trade this person to this job. It was more of an organizational issue, any changes in your organizational chart, target class sizes, if there was a grievance in any contract, that would come to the personnel committee, and we would work on that and then come to the larger board and say, we've thoroughly vetted this MOU grievance, and we've come to you with this MOU as our recommendation. So that would be my suggestion as to personnel issues. Those things have been missing from this table for a while, and it's just been happening within the superintendent office. And that's no slam against anybody.
No.
It's just the way that our structure has kind of changed. And I think what I've been hearing is, with the resurrection of some of these committees, that we're feeling a gap there. We're feeling a need to we're all not in the loop on things. And so things are being acted upon, and we get to our board meeting and we don't know how that change came about. And so that's the way committees have worked in the past, is to vet all of those things prior to the board meeting, come to you with a recommendation, and then we vote on it.
And a justification with the recommendation.
Yes.
A Reader's Digest version.
Yes, a Reader's Digest version, not rehashing everything.
Right.
Here's what we've
That
done.
makes total sense.
So not everybody has to do all the work.
Right. And we're moving on things that are going to happen. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So we're not, it's a forward-thinking measure.
Yes, and now I don't know how the finance has operated, so I'm a little bit grayer on that.
Yeah, and I wanted that discussion with finance too, because what you described as personnel makes sense to me. It's kind of like a vetting tool of, there are action items, there is some triaging, decision-making and presentation to the board. But I don't feel like the current way our finance committee is set up, there's none of that. So I just want to clarify if we need it, and if we are going to have it, what that committee is going to do, what the purpose of it is.
Well, I was on the finance committee when we had it. The treasurer was on it, ran it, and they really talked about, if there was a budget adjustment or a revised budget, the ADM, they talked about the upcoming finance report during the time there, the budget. If you have time to question, you can go through the line items or something right there, not saying, did you spend a pencil for this person, just like, why are we down in this line, or why are we up on this line? To get some clarification, because when it comes to the full board, you could just say, well, we've looked at all this and this is our plan to go forward with it. And, they met, yeah, we did meet monthly, but just for an hour, and, a lot of it had to do with what was coming before the, next board meeting, because it was always a week before that board meeting when we had it, yes.
Does it make sense for the finance committee to be more active with the creation of the new budget? With working through, I don't know if this is working through some of those things that you've mentioned tonight, that we need to talk about, where do we need to make cuts? What does that look like? Is that appropriate for the committee to be working on that? Or is that more appropriate for our finance director to come up with a plan and bring it to the entire board? I don't know what that should look like.
Well, I wondered, like, even when you talk about creating a new position, like for personnel, it involves money. So does that involve finance or not? It doesn't sound like, because, right, I didn't hear that mentioned. So I'm looking for clarification, because I'm not looking to meet with Lisa personally to go over what she's bringing to the board, right? I would like if we have a committee for it to function in a more productive way, like whether that's triaging, you use the term action items, we don't have action items, do we have some action items? Do we have some triaging or decision-making, or if it's just a replica of what is being brought to the board, it's not very fruitful for anyone's time.
So what do you want to do? What do you want to dive into? What are you thinking? I don't know. Go ahead, somebody got a question?
Okay, well, I think, I am our rep on Goodhue County Ed District Board. And that board functions very differently from this board. And so, the first and third Tuesdays, conveniently after our meetings, Minnesota School Board Association has a coffee and conversation meeting. It's just an hour. And we talk about whatever people who show up want to talk about. So last time I said, hey, who else is on an intermediate school board? And how do they operate? And how do you make it more effective? And so I networked with other board members all over the state, way up north, down south, east, and west, and got some really great ideas. And maybe there's another meeting tomorrow, and I plan on going because I think they're really valuable, to ask who has a finance committee? What does your finance committee do? Because we do, our strength is in our community, and there's a community of school districts out there that have all these different committees, and why not ask them? So I'm happy to do that tomorrow too. To just get an idea, because this is hard. This is an important job. It's a hard job. And I think that our superintendent is working really hard to build a team. And I think we have to learn, like, what's our part on the team and what can we do to support the work our admin team is doing.
Yes.
Years ago, we had a list of all of our committees and what the role of the committees were. That can be found and resurrected. I think if we looked back in our old agenda packets, we'll probably find that. It would probably be in the organizational meeting agenda, which is always the first meeting in January of every year. It's probably in there, or maybe the second meeting in January, because we vote on it then. That might help us to define parameters a little bit more.
Right.
And then we can, yay or nay that, but it'd be a starting spot.
Right. As the other person on the finance committee, I feel a lot of pressure to do this correctly. because I'm an achiever. And I think sometimes we have, all of us, I have a sense of urgency, like, I need to know all this right now, and I have to do it, and I have to do it the best. And I think sometimes urgency, it should be a priority, and we should be urgent in continuing to move forward and figure out, okay, if we're doing this, how are we doing it? And don't slide it off the table or kick the can down the road. But the urgency is moving forward methodically and carefully and not just letting it drop. Does that make sense?
I think the other role of the finance committee is the end user, so we're talking kind of globally internally, but you are also liaisons to the community, so they're able to, from the 30,000 foot view as finance committee, to be able to educate the rest of your members on like, hey, these are the discussions, this is what it means in everyday terms in terms of your taxpayer dollars and what's the return on your investment. I think one thing, and we'll look at this for the evaluation, is really looking at the budget boot camp and maybe even being involved with that, so understanding the audit information, how that helps us make decisions, because that's coming up, staffing, but then being able to educate the other side, right?
Right.
So just to remember that element, because your liaison essentially to those that are emailing and texting and calling or talking to at Target, about that. So I mean, just another extension of the work, but just understand the why.
Yes.
And part of the reason we kind of got rid of some of the committees was there was so much that was discussed at the committees that we then turn around and come back and rehash it all again at the board meeting. And we were just kind of burning the staff out to it. And so, yeah, we probably didn't kind of misstepped or something, or whatever you want to say, on some of the issues that on the personnel stuff. We need to clean that up in the finance. One thing I'd like to see the finance work on is if there's a budget, revised budget, we get that several times a year, to have them look at why is that, instead of bringing it right to the board, the finance committee can look at what's revising it because of less ADMs, or more revenue, less expenses, more expenses. What are we gonna do to offset that? Instead of us hashing it before and then come with a recommendation. I think that's part of Ms. Ryder she should draft it, that's her role, and then bring it to the committee to go over it and see, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I have, this is what we're gonna do, and keep in mind, I want to keep in mind our fund balance. We heard tonight, we heard back a year or two ago that where we're going down, we're just gonna go down into the red, and I don't wanna be that person on the board here when we go do that, because I'm not going to be. I'm gonna be vocal about that, so. That's just my take. Just thinking, just saying.
We can demonstrate a very high functioning ad hoc transportation committee meeting. That just happened.
Yeah, how do we get the ad hoc?
Because we don't need it all the time.
Right.
Ad hoc is just like impromptu.
I understand.
To view my ad hoc committee transportation, we first have to make a motion because there must be a.
Do we need a motion for the ad hoc committee members to be?
We're gonna present a recommendation.
Okay. Is there a motion to? We should probably list the name of the ad hoc committee members too on the motion. Right?
No more emails. Here.
Right? We got 3 of them. We got 2 over here and 1 over here.
Jen Grove,
And Jen?
Lisa Ryder,
Right.
and myself. It was a fantastic.
So 6 of you.
Yeah, it was proper. A couple of the method to the madness, obviously, Rachel, Teresa, and I are all brand new, so I brought in Jen Grove because she has some historical understandings of our transportation.
You're trying to say down Iowa, they rode the bus a lot down there or
Just
something?
knows how that bus, how the bus.
No, they're trying to say that I was at the hub when I was in the middle school and how nutty it could get.
Well, I entertain a motion to list the 6 people on the ad hoc committee. If you want to do that, I'll entertain a
No, the
motion.
motion is actually whether or not you want to accept our recommendation.
Right. We haven't made the recommendation though.
Oh, we have a memo.
We're gonna let Rachel and Therese start, and I'm
so
just
I'm
gonna
not-
bring in all.
I'm not listening very clearly then.
We got you. Okay.
I don't have notes, but I'll go from.
Yeah, I'll fill in the gaps.
I have my notes.
Newbie power.
So.
Let's hear your written report here. I'm trying to look for it here. I'm just trying to see it here.
So one piece of information that really brought clarity is that every 10 years, we have to go out for RFPs. So we are 2 years away from that marker, which really kind of swung a lot of the decision-making because we had entertained going out for RFPs, that was something that we wanted to consider. And it was not recommended by CISO, and Nikki had a little memo in regard to that because she thought that we would get a better rate if we negotiated directly with First Student this year than we would probably get if we set it out to bid. We talked a little bit about a 1-tier versus a 2-tier system, and quite frankly, nobody thinks we're gonna get enough drivers to accomplish a 1-tier, not to mention the cost.
And it would also reduce in impacting our ability to get drivers is that it would take the 4-hour shift and make it a 3-hour shift. So people would be making less money and could go other places to make more money. So finances were a factor as well. And also behavior.
Yeah,
You noticed
interestingly,
that, when we had a 1-tier system, there were more behavior issues on the bus than with the 2-tier, likely because of the span of ages of kids on the bus. So,
So for all those factors, we wanted to make a recommendation to enter into negotiations with a contract with First Student.
Through CISO for 2 years.
Or 2 years?
Right.
Then we have to do an RFP.
Right,
Or you have to do it.
Every 10 years.
right.
So what is the contract with First Student right now, or CISO, or whatever it is? Is it an 8-year contract? Do you know?
It ends as of this end of this fiscal year, so that's why we need to do something in
So-
the next year for sure. And so we're in 8 of 10, is that understanding?
So so I understand, maybe I'm a little slow tonight, I'm tired. We have to do it every 10 years, but it's not a 10-year contract.
Right, it's an RFP must be done every 10 years. But we have negotiated without the RFP process for 8 years.
Gotcha.
With First Student, and this last one was 3 years, I think.
Okay,
And now it's up.
gotcha. I'm with you now. Thank you.
And the benefit, their last 3-year contract, I remember watching the board meetings. And because we negotiated a multi-year contract, it actually saved the district money. So we've got 2 years left. We want to go after the 2 years.
Okay.
And hope that works again.
So fuel prices stay down.
That's all longer than up and on. That's all that is. So technically, the recommendation that we're making is to continue the partnerships, to keep direct negotiations, to stay as an ongoing and existing client, and the recommendation is to negotiate for a 2-year contract.
Anybody have more questions about that? Wants to entertain that motion? Yes, you make
I
that
was just
motion?
gonna make the motion, I'll make a motion to enter into negotiations with First Student for a 2-year contract.
Ms. Tiff's motion, is there a second? Second by Ms. Schoenfelder. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We have one thing we have to bring back to
Yes.
the table.
Yeah, so in the personnel committee, we discussed, we had two meetings ago, we had tabled the discussion about increase in the communication director, communication manager from 0.8 to full-time. And at that moment, we didn't have enough information to fully approve that increase. Do you want to share, Dr. Regner, a little bit about what that?
Let's put it back on the table first.
Oh, can we make a motion to put it back on the table for more discussion?
The motion to put the table motion back on the table, is there a second?
Second.
Second, motion by Ms. Rowe, second by Ms. Oldfelder. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, is now on the table. Go ahead.
All right.
So the communication manager position is a 32-hour-a-week position, and we had proposed adding an additional 8 hours, making it $40. For many reasons, a couple of things. This year's data agreements due to the new legislation, the MOUs required a point person, which required an additional time of meeting, vetting, creating MOUs with the help of our attorney. The other piece is with the new website, which is going to be launched this week, I promise. And the loss of our webmaster in community at the time that had been allocated to that position was dropped. We needed to be able to have additional time spent towards our webpage as well. So I will just say at the personnel meeting, we talked a lot about being very lean, and often our departments are parties of one. And so having that extra 8 hours a week afforded some opportunities to get some of those logistical pieces in terms of communication, organization. A lot of them due to obviously a brand new website that we were desperately in need of, and then the new legislation that requires additional just focus and collaboration with the communities.
Yes.
How is this position being paid?
Currently, that specific position is coming out of ESSER funds, which is what we presented, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong. So the ESSER funds have to be spent down by September regardless, otherwise we lose them, so.
And the funding ends what for that whole position?
So the ESSER funds will run out September of 2024. The 4 days of the week that she currently is out of the ESSER 160, which is the general funds, or general ESSER. And then the 161, which is where you're outside the school and outside the school year with all of the partnership agreements that are being done. That's where that justification lies in using that for the last 8 hours.
Is that runs out at the same time? So this would just put it through that, because then you have to try to find some type of grant or funding to keep that position. So
this is a temporary
fund, essentially, right?
it was approved based upon the funds in that time period. So
And an identified need. We really needed somebody in that position. So we'll have to maybe rework the budget in the future, but I will go ahead and make the motion. It's the personnel committee's recommendation, bringing forward the recommendation that we would increase the communication manager from 32 hours to 40 hours.
motion by Ms. Rowe, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Bjornsted. Now this is just for the ESSER funds, and then before that, you have to come up with some other type of funding stream, so, which would work through the finance committee. So, see, you got your work to do.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Any more on the personnel or finance committee that we want to talk about? Go ahead.
Do we want to make a decision as to whether or not this should be a part of the regular agenda each time, or do we wait until January, our first January meeting, to determine for sure what we want to do with these committees?
What is your opinion?
And we only have one meeting left before that. So I think we could just wait and make sure it's part of that discussion for the organizational meeting.
Sure, that sounds good. Hard to believe it, the year went by just about, it was fast too, one more meeting went, so we don't need to do anything more on that than as to make a motion for that, so. We'll include it on the organizational meeting. Let me just have that in first meeting in January, which I believe is the 2nd of January, a Tuesday, so.
I'll take copious notes tomorrow.
You what?
I'll take copious notes tomorrow.
Copious.
Coffee and conversation.
Copious,
Yeah.
All right, we're moving on to the final reading of policy 606.5, library materials.
Right, so 606.5 complements policy 606, which is my favorite, by the way, policy. It complements it in that this is a vetting opportunity for those who are curious about our library materials, not our curricular materials, that's 606. But it organizes it in such a way so that community members, parents, staff members can actually look more intimately at what we're selecting and putting in the library.
Okay. And do we need a motion on that then? I believe we do, don't we?
Yeah, I move to approve policy 606.5, library materials as presented.
I second.
Motion by Ms. Rose, second by Ms. Schoenfelder. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Since we're on policies, Ms. Ryder, you heard Mr. Olinger's recommendation on that one. I saw you writing down that 1,500 to 5,000, so we'll let you take care of that, and that's your wishes, so. All right. We're gonna now, it's the superintendent evaluation. We're gonna go into closed session. So I need a motion to go into closed session. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Bjornstedt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Tiff. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We are in closed session. Now, do we have to record this?
Thank you, everyone.
Lisa sent us a different link.
Yeah, she did. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You too, bye, thank you.
No, I'll just turn it off.